What's going on, Awesemo crew? I'm Eric Lindquist. This is the MLB Deeper Dive. I'm sitting sidecar next to one Greg Ehrenberg. That's at G Ehrenberg DFS. You need to be following him on the Twitter sphere. He does such a good job of plugging me, so I got to make sure that I get his plug in very, very early. We were talking a little bit about the show. Apparently, the man can grab the rim, so that's important. He also thinks he's the fastest man company. I'll let you guys be the voters and the deciders of such things, but who do you think wins in a race, me or Greg? And also, Greg, how are you doing, my guy?
Well, first of all, I mean, you've got a bad hip. You got hit by a car once. I've got a kind of bulky knee at this point in my life. So I mean, we're kind of washed at this point, but it's hard to say. True. But yeah, if we were to actually take this seriously and give me some time to train for it, yes, I would beat you in a race.
Yeah, News God wins. There's probably the answer right there. He's automatically. We'll get a line going. I don't know when the Awesemo company retreat is. I don't know when we're going to be going on vacation together, but something tells me that one day in the not so far away future, we will all be together racing, making sure that works. News God has ran from the police. Oh my goodness. Well, I don't have any experience with that, so I will give News God the automatic win there. But as you guys are coming in here, this is the MLB Deeper Dive. We would love if you would hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and definitely hit that notification bell so you know when this and all the other content at Awesemo is going live. We are sponsored today by one No House Advantage. No House Advantage is a fantastic site if you are trying to build your bankroll. If you already have a bankroll, it's a fantastic site. We have so many prop-based contests, whether that's NBA, MLB, NFL, PGA, all of those goodies for cash prizes. It's exclusively peer-to-peer. It has a different amount of level, like you can level the playing field, basically. It's 500 player prop offerings, so many things that NHA has going, but most importantly, what they have going today is a first match deposit bonus, not just of $20, but it goes up to $50 with a promo code Awesemo today. That expires once the NBA contest locks tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern time, 6 p.m. Pacific. So make sure that you use that promo code to receive the $50 bonus. Beat your friends, not the house. Download in the App Store and win big with player props today. A couple of the props that I was looking at before the show, I think that going to some of these Oakland bats, they have 0.5 hits up and down the lineup there, whether it's Canna, who's now leaning off, Chapman in the 2-hole, Olsen, all of those guys are in fantastic spots. I think the over on 0.5 hits looks to be a good spot where you could be going to the 10, 9, 8 confident spots, but definitely check out their goodies over there. It doesn't lock until 5:05 p.m. on the West Coast, 8:05 on the East Coast, but that is all the goodies that you have over at NHA for today, but we have 14 games to get talking about. Greg, are you ready to get going, my dude?
Sure, why not? Let's. By the way, I think some comments you said before, they seem to be taken out of context in the YouTube chat here, but yeah, I mean, let's go ahead.
Oh, when I said plug, okay. See, yeah. You know what? This is what people do. People spin words. It's not okay. I can't help it. I want to plug my guy. I don't think that sounds terrible. Okay, maybe it sounds a little terrible. I'm trying to rightfully. What would you say? What would be the wording that you would use for that?
I mean, the joke that I would want to make, I believe I'm not allowed to say right now, but I would say embrace warmly, lovingly.
Oh my goodness. All right. We have a lot of games to get to, so I'm just going to bypass all of the comments. We're going to bypass all of these good things. Ayo. Yes, Calvin, that is definitely it. First off the bat, we've got the Houston Astros and Baltimore Orioles. Big talking point on this slate right out of the get-go here. We've got Houston sitting there, minus 174 favorites, 5.3 implied run total. Baltimore 4.2, a little bit larger total for them as well. Looking at both of these matchups, you've got on the hill for Zach Greinke on the hill for Houston. You got Jorge Lopez. He's very bad at pitching baseballs. Over there for Baltimore, you're seeing some massive ownership over on the top stacks tool, which is definitely free and you should definitely be checking out throughout today. But ownership share right around 16% right now. Top stack percentage around 11. Some negative leverage. Going to be the most popular team on this slate. Greg, what are you going to be doing with these pitchers first of all?
Yeah, so the pitchers, I mean, we can keep this short. I don't have interest in either of them. Zach Greinke does have certainly the name value there, but he hasn't been particularly good this year, especially not from a fantasy perspective. Now 37 years old, Zach Greinke, pretty steady decline in his velocity. Now only throws 89.1. That's his average fastball velocity. Strikeout rate this year is all the way down to 18.1%. That is the lowest of his career. So, with that in mind, we have a pitcher who seems to be on the decline. was once one of the top starting pitchers in baseball. This year, more middle of the road, 3.74 ERA, 4.19 expected ERA. But the real issue from a fantasy perspective is that low strikeout rate. And then number two, he still gets priced fairly highly. Like there's never any kind of price decrease in Zach Greinke, where it's not like we're able to roster him at, like 7,000 or anything like that, which is probably around where he belongs to be priced at this point in his career. So, with that in mind, Zach Greinke at 9,000 on DraftKings. And then on FanDuel, Greinke is priced at 8,400. It's just too expensive. Also, the Baltimore bats, not the most prolific offense, but playing in Baltimore does present a pretty favorable hitting environment.
Yeah, definitely agreed. I mean, it's going to be the top spot on the entire slate that people are going to. I'm probably not going to be going there whatsoever because of the ownership, but I can understand if you want to be going there. It should be reduced ownership from what we saw yesterday on a 6-game slate with 14 games to be able to spread it around, 28 total teams that we can turn to. You got to think that the ownership is going to come down drastically from where we saw yesterday. But if you are going to be going to these Houston Astros, who are you kind of prioritizing amongst this lineup? I mean, Jose Altuve leading off has just been kind of back to Jose Altuve things. Maybe not cheating this time around, good times, but anybody else from Houston, you'd kind of be looking to make sure you included in your stacks.
Yeah, well, I mean, for starters, we have a ton of ownership going into this team, but it's also pretty concentrated on a couple of guys, or a few guys, actually. So we have Yordan Alvarez projected for 30% ownership today, and then we also have Michael Brantley right around that same number, and then we have Abraham Toro, 25%, and then Jose Altuve just under 20%. So, I mean, there are ways to stack this team and actually get different today. One of the issues with the Houston stack yesterday, I mean, before them going out and scoring 10 runs, I mean, if we just looked at the data and the information we had before the slate, is that there was no way to stack them and differentiate yourself because every single player in the lineup was projected for 25 to 30% ownership. So there was just an understanding like, hey, if I stack the Astros and they go off, I'm not even cash because this team is going to be rostered by, a quarter to a third of the field. Today, the difference is, while this is still the most popular stack on the slate, there are some lower owned players we could get to that will differentiate us a little bit. So we don't have an ownership yet for Robo Garcia, but he's hitting second at 3,200. If he ends up being, lower than say like 10% owned, he's somebody who'd be worth getting overweight to the field on. Chas McCormick right now, he's sub 10% owned. Martin Maldonado is a catching option. He's sub 10% owned. Miles Straw is projected for less than 1% ownership. So there are actual ways to get to the Houston Astros today and not have it be an insanely chalky stack, which was not something we were able to do yesterday.
And going to the Baltimore side, we're not really seeing ownership on any of these guys outside of Freddie Galvis is garnering a little bit. He's 3K. Shortstop is, we've got some spend up options. We've also got a cheapie on the bottom end that I'm sure we're going to be talking about in the Tampa Bay and Boston game. But anything from Baltimore, is that just going to be kind of a pass for you today?
So, I mean, Baltimore, I don't mind getting to them, although it's all in the context of, when there's a lot of teams on a slate like this, there's going to be a whole bunch of teams where it's like, hey, this team projects for a 2 to 3% chance of being one of the top stacks on the slate. So a lot of times I'll find, a core group of teams that I really want to build my lineups around. And then there'll be a bunch of other teams just thrown in the mix that I have, 2 to 3% stacks of on a slate that's, 14 games like this one, or sometimes a 15 game slate. So the Orioles do look a little bit under-owned, 2% chance of being a top stack and less than 1% ownership share. So that information, it looks like this is a team worth going overweight to the field on, but this isn't a primary stack by any means. If you're really playing a handful of lineups, there's no reason to play Baltimore. It's more of a situation where if you're like me and playing a bunch of lineups, then they're worth including in the player pool. Guys like Cedric Mullins, who I've liked Cedric Mullins a lot as of late. He's somebody who's actually towards the top of all baseball wins above replacement this year. The only hitter that's actually been better than him from a value perspective so far this year is Vladimir Guerrero Jr. But Cedric Mullins, he's reasonably priced on FanDuel and DraftKings, and he should be more expensive given the success he's had this year. So I think he's at least worth more than the 1% ownership the field has on him. But other than that, there's nobody that I'm really trying to target.
Number 2 in wins above replacement. That's fantastic. Good for you, Cedric Mullins. That's good stuff. We go from a team that's super chalky hitting to 2 pitchers that we can definitely kind of be turning to in this next one. We've got Washington. It's actually now down to plus 105 here for Washington. We got the confirmation that Max Scherzer was indeed going to be starting. Now that total has dropped from 8.5 to 6.5 very, very quickly. I think that's no action though, because if you bet with the idea that you weren't going to have Max Scherzer out there, well, he's there and you need to have both starters going in order for there to be action on that wager. But 3.4 for Washington implied total, 3.3 for Philadelphia. Zach Wheeler, Max Scherzer, both garnering quite a bit of ownership here, rightfully so, popping in the top 2% of the top 2 pitcher percentage tool on the top pitchers tool over at Awesemo. Which one is kind of your priority for today, and why is it Max Scherzer?
Well, he's cheaper on Fanduel than Zach Wheeler. On Draftkings is a little bit more expensive, but we have a much better chance in our projections of Zach Wheeler being a top pitcher. So of Max Scherzer being a top pitcher than Zach Wheeler. So Max Scherzer right now we have with a 25% chance of being the top scoring pitcher on the slate. That is the highest number of anybody else on the day, whereas Zach Wheeler comes in with a 17% chance of being a top 2 pitcher for the day. So, with that in mind, we're getting them around the same price point. And I lean toward Scherzer. Also, there's a little bit more of history here in terms of him being a high strikeout guy. Wheeler's been incredible from a strikeout perspective so far this season, but he hasn't been in the past. So I think there's a chance that'll regress a little bit. I'm still really unsure about what to do with a lot of these high-end pitchers, just given the changes in how the grip is going to work with the pitcher substances and them not being allowed to use foreign substances on the ball. Because we saw some really wonky pitching results yesterday. And even if you look at the spin rates on the pitchers, they were all over the place. Like Darvish, he was way down, but he still had a big game. We saw Julio Urias was actually flat. He was about the same as what he's been in the past, but he sucked. And then guys like Frankie Montas, his spin rate was way down. He sucked. Tyler Mahle, his spin rate was way down. He sucked. So I generally, on some of these ace pitchers, I like to be really heavy on them and build my lineups around them. I'm not really confident taking any pitcher and saying like, hey, I want this guy in 60, 70% of my lineups, just because I think there's so much variance with some of these pitchers now.
I kind of agree with that. I think that putting a cap on him at, 35, 40% today, I mean, if you had to kind of go over which one, I mean, for me, it's definitely still going to be Max Scherzer. We know that he can have a fly ball problem. I mean, I'm not going to be looking at anybody from this Philly lineup that I'm really going to want to pick on a 14-game slate to try to be the one-off that can hit a homer there. There's so many other good spots to be going to. On a different slate, maybe I would try that with that 21.3-degree launch angle that Max Scherzer has. We know him historically to be a fly ball pitcher. That's kind of what he does. Zach Wheeler just been very revelatory this year as well. Actually, no, he's been good forever. I mean, from the Mets coming over, he's definitely shown some progress, continually to elevate his stuff. So Zach Wheeler, another pitcher that under different circumstances where we had ideas about the sticky substance, I would have a ton of as well. I've been very bullish on him, but as you said, just a lot of variance that's going to exist there. But any batters that you're looking at from either side, we saw Schwarber just go completely ham over the weekend with 5 homers, had a 3-dong game, a 2-dong game, like just absolutely out of his mind. He'll probably be, I'm assuming that he's leading off here. I haven't seen that lineup. He is indeed leading off. Would you possibly be looking at bats from either side here?
I'm just pulling up really quickly Zach Wheeler's spin rate from his last start. Not that I think this is the end all be all, but if there's something significantly different in his last start versus some of the other starts he's had this year, then at least I would say like, hey, as a contrarian stack, I wouldn't mind making 1 or 2 stacks going up against him. But, at least from the Phillies side, as I'm looking this up, we have the Phillies with only a 0.8% chance of being the top scoring team of the day. And that's actually appropriately owned. So I don't think there's any leverage to be gained there. I'm not going to be looking to stack against Max Scherzer. I think that there's plenty of better spots to get to on a 14-game slate. As for Zach Wheeler and his spin rate this year, it looks like he's been fairly consistent to this point. His spin rate last game his spin rate hasn't even been that egregiously high this year anyway, but 2,365 RPMs average pitch from his last start. And that is actually right in line to even a little bit higher than what we saw from on the year. And we've already seen some pitchers who in recent starts have stopped using substances, and we've seen spin rates come down on them pretty significantly. So to me, it looks like Zach Wheeler should remain around the same probably. So I'm not going to be looking to stack against him either.
All right. Well, we're going to move it along. We've got the White Sox in Pittsburgh, minus 183 White Sox favored with Lucas Giolito on the bump. Another pitcher to be talking about. And if you have concerns with those other guys, definitely probably going to have them for a guy whose average fastball velocity is right around 94 here for the season. I don't know. One of my favorite, if you're looking over at Odd Shopper today, I really like taking the under on 7.5 strikeouts for Lucas Giolito. He's a guy that I'm sure I'm going to still have some DFS exposure to, but let's just start with him. What are your plans for Lucas Giolito in this spot against a Pittsburgh lineup that I don't know how many Ks are really available here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Giolito, one thing that's really nice about it, it's the price point. So he is still one of the aces on this slate, but he comes at a discount. He's 9,400 as compared to Garrett Cole on DraftKings, 11,000, Scherzer, 10,800, Zach Wheeler, 10,200. So he's cheaper than all of those guys. And then on FanDuel, it becomes a little bit different there, single pitcher site, and he's more appropriately priced. Where on FanDuel, Giolito's 10,500, so he's in the same price range as the other aces. So DraftKings, to me, Giolito's a better play than he is on FanDuel. Also, the Pirates have such a weak offense against right-handed pitching that I think there's a lot of security with Giolito, and we've seen him at times be allowed to work deep into games. So he hasn't been quite as good this year as he was last year, the year before. So that is maybe a little bit of a concern. Strikeout rate has taken a little dip, but even with that aside, still 30.9% K rate this year. That's elite. And his stuff overall for the year, 3.86 ERA, 3.32 ERA. They're by no means bad numbers. Also, it's really advantageous that he's moving to a pitcher's park in Pittsburgh. He's facing a bad offense, and he gets to face a pitcher instead of a DH. So I do like Giolito quite a bit for this slate.
And then on the other side, Tyler Anderson on the season, not anything that looks that fantastic. Decent keeping hard hit percentage down, 69th percentile on that. But when it does get hit, it gets hit hard, bottom 11th percentile in Major League Baseball. In that regard, 25th percentile barrel percentage. So definitely can get hit there. Another guy where the fastball spin is way up. He's 84th percentile for that. If we're going to be talking about sticky substance for some of these good pitchers, I think it's also going to affect some of these weaker arms. What do you think about Tyler Anderson, and what are kind of your stack plans going up against him?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to really want to roster Tyler Anderson at all. He's just not been good this year. For even if you say, his spin rate's up, but still, they're looking at a guy who doesn't generate strikeouts, has a 4.89 ERA, 4.55 expected ERA, and it's a really tough matchup against the Chicago White Sox, who have one of the better offenses in baseball. So with that in mind, I actually think the White Sox are going pretty under-owned here, only with a 3.5% ownership share. So the White Sox are one of the teams that I actually think it makes sense to get to, like 5 to 10% of a stack of, as opposed to some of these other teams where, they're just kind of in the barrel of teams, just get some exposure to. I actually think the White Sox are more of a priority team.
I agree. And just a little bit over. So 101 WRC plus up again. Well, I guess that's against the righties. I was going to say, I thought it was a little bit higher when I looked at it this morning. I was doing the strategy show with one, God, I can't even think of his name right now. Spags. It's been a long day. I love my boy Spags. He's coming on after us to do the Live Before Lock show. He always calls me Greg, so I might as well just forget his name one time just to make it even. But anything else that really kind of stands out to you from this game? Obviously, probably some of the lefties, maybe like Moran and Polanco. Those are the two guys who do K at a pretty high rate. So if you're going to be looking for Ks, they're kind of the additions to that pitcher spot for Giolito. But any hitters you might want to take one-offs from Pittsburgh?
No, but by the way, it's a 122 WRC plus for the Chicago White Sox against left-handed pitching. Is in terms of hitters on Chicago, there's a bunch of guys I'm overweight to. Tim Anderson, he's projected for 18% ownership. That's the number that I'm overweight to in the build that I have right now. Jose Abreu only picking up 5% ownership at the moment. Brian Goodwin's a little bit of a weird one for me because he's hitting in a really good lineup spot for Chicago. They've had him batting second, but Tony La Russa is just kind of this old school manager who is like, hey, I put the guy second who I like to sacrifice bunt and do things like that. So Goodwin, he's in my player pool. He's only 1% projected ownership now, but not really a core player or anything like that. The guys who I most want to get overweight to field on are Tim Anderson, Jose Abreu, and then Andrew Vaughn, who I've had a lot more exposure than I should have for most of the season.
Yep, probably going to be there with you today too. So that's great to know that we are going to burn on that bridge together. Yeah, I'm going to have a lot of White Sox, I think, compared to the field. Definitely a good spot. And check out that top stacks tool. That's a great point to be getting some of the leverage that you are in that spot. Let's keep it moving. Kansas City plus 241 going up against the Yankees, 7.5 implied runs here for that entire game here. Man, we're just getting all the pitching out of the way here early. Obviously, I'm not referring to one Brian Singer here going up against the Yankees. Garrett Cole, though, on the other side of the bump. If we want to talk about spin concerns, this guy lost nearly 1,500 RPMs on his last start. He's been the poster child of this entire scandal, or whatever you want to call it, scandal, or just kind of the change that they're doing in order to get the banned substances out of pitchers' hands, quite literally. But Garrett Cole, it's still hard not to have some interest in him here. Plus, it's still somebody who can throw it over 97 miles per hour. We'll see if velocity and how that kind of affects him here. But what are you doing with the great question mark that is Garrett Cole today?
Yeah, I mean, he's in my player pool, but I'm underweight to the field on him. The biggest concern I have here is, he's been effective in his last couple of starts. But like you said, the spin rate is down and the strikeouts are way down. Only 4 strikeouts in his last start. That was tied for the least he's had all season. And then also after the game, he was complaining to the media and was saying like, hey, it's really hard to grip the baseball. And for him, when you also compare that with the a lack of strikeouts for him, and all that to me means going forward, I don't think he's going to be a bad pitcher by any means. I just don't think he's going to be quite as dominant as he was earlier in the season. So, Garrett Cole, like you said, his spin rate last start was 2303 was his average spin rate on his pitches. That's by far the lowest he's had in any start this year. The next lowest he had was like 2500, and we've seen him get as high as an average of almost 2600. So to see him get down all the way to 2300, it's definitely a concern. There's something that's happening there that we know about that's impacting the amount of spin he's generating on his pitches. And it's also changing how he's pitching in a pretty big way. Last time out, he threw more changeups than he's thrown any other start in his entire career. So I think there's going to be a little bit of adjustment period here, right? There might be some inconsistencies. He's going to different pitches. This is also something we've seen lead to pitcher injuries at this point. Tyler Glasnow hurt his elbow, torn UCL. He's going to have Tommy John surgery likely at some point in the future. He said it's because he had to change some of his grips and his arm action to be able to compensate for not being able to grip the baseballs as well. And that's also something we saw like yesterday with Aaron Savali, who was pitching well, but wasn't able to make it through the fifth inning. I think he came out in the middle of before. I think it was either in the fourth or fifth inning he came out when he was pitching well, and it was because he got hurt. And that could very well have been from the same thing. I think this is going to lead to a lot of pitcher injuries going forward. That's not to predict that I think Garrett Cole gets hurt, but there's just a whole lot of variables that I think are kind of outside of our control here and that are hard to know what to make of. So Garrett Cole, there's enough talent there that's going to be in my player pool, but he's going to be really popular. And I tend to go underweight to some of these spots where there's a lot of variance and somebody's popular.
Yeah, I got to agree with you. It is one of those things that where I see Toronto, which is kind of a pretty close comp to Kansas City in a lot of regards. I mean, they both K rate at 22.1% of the time up against right-handed pitching here. Toronto actually with a 192 ISO up against right-handed pitching. That's a gigantic number. And as opposed to Kansas City, which is at 145, WRC plus for Kansas City of only 92. So if you can kind of do some of the same things he did against a Toronto team that's actually 112 up against WRC plus up against righties, I think that there could be a path for success, even if he doesn't rack up Ks at the same rate, but you're paying 11K for that. You're going to want some more upside possibly. And I think that there's some cheaper arms that are far less popular that I think can give you different builds and probably a spot to be going on tournaments. But let's go to the Yankees bats here then too. I mean, I'm assuming we're not going to have a ton of interest in Casey. I mean, Garrett Cole can give up a couple of hard hits here and there, but not anything that I'm going to get to in a meaningful way. But the Yankees side going up against Singer, that implied total is pretty large. One of the larger ones that we actually have on the slate at 4.8 here for the Yankees. Kind of the usual suspects from them. Does anything stick out for them against Brian Singer today?
No, I mean, so one issue I had with the Yankees, though, is even though this is a pretty good spot for them and there is some positive leverage here, the core bats are all really expensive. And I think if you were to stack the Yankees, I think you'd want to have exposure to guys like Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, DJ LeMahieu. And they're all so expensive. We have LeMahieu on DraftKings 5,000, Stanton 6,000, Aaron Judge 5,700. Given how many aces there are on this slate, it stands to reason I think a couple of them are going to have really big games, and it's going to be really hard to roster some of those guys with the Yankees bats. So to me, I'm finding it hard to get to these high-end Yankee bats, so I'm not very high on them as a stack.
You are getting a little bit of positive leverage over on DK, top stack percentage at 4.6, 2.9% ownership share. But the Yankees always end up being a little bit more owned than what they think they are because they're the Yankees. So yeah, I'm probably with you where it'll be a team that I'm basically flat on, if even there, maybe a little bit lower. Next up, we've got we'll keep it moving. We've got so much to get to. Boston plus 107 going into Tampa Bay. A lot to talk about here. Erod is a guy that's kind of a curious case. The pitch count is never kind of where you want it to be, but we know the kind of K potential that the guy has. And I think his overall numbers this entire season have been really, really good. 88.1 exit velocity, 35.1% hard hit percentage, 27% K rate, keeping the walks down to 6.2%. It's a pitcher that if you could just get the pitch count up, this is such a good spot, a much better ballpark to be pitching in. I'm not sure what to really do with Erod. What are you going to do today?
Yeah, I think he's a good source of salary savings on DraftKings. For Fanduel single pitcher site, he's also only at 6,400, but I don't really see a need to go to him. But on DraftKings, where we do need a lot of cheap SP2s in some lineups, I think he makes more sense. A lot of people are just going to be scared off by his ERA this year, and that's also the reason that his price is so low. But a lot of it's bad luck. He has a 6.21 ERA, but his expected ERA 3.54. His FIP is 3.63. So those numbers are all pretty much in line with what we've seen from him for most of his career. The difference this year, 380 BABIP, that's been really bad luck for him and really unlucky, and a 62.4% strand rate. So we have a situation where a ton of balls are getting put in play against Eduardo Rodriguez are leading to hits. And then those guys who are on base are scoring a lot more often than they should just due to bad sequencing because a lot of those hits are getting strung together. So with that in mind, I think the key here is, like you said, 26.8% K rate for Eduardo Rodriguez. That is actually the highest of his career. And then on the other side, a 6.2% walk rate, the lowest of his career. Those are all positive things. And I think more than anything, he's been done in by some bad luck this year. So as an SP2, I actually like Eduardo Rodriguez quite a bit on DraftKings 6,400. That's a really good salary saving option. And I think his luck is going to start to normalize sooner rather than later. And I hope it's today.
I hope so too. Yeah, Alex Baker, if you go through lineup study over on FC, a guy that on the multiple slates, I was just curious what he was doing with him. He was playing a lot of Eduardo Rodriguez. So I feel very bullish following the number one daily fantasy player in the world in that regard. Over on the Tampa Bay side, going to be a little bit of a bullpen game there. So we'll probably skip over that. But the one guy that we obviously have to talk about, we've got to talk about a 2K shortstop that we've got for Tampa Bay. The number one prospect in baseball is in the 2-hole, Wander Franco, or the Wander Boy, or I don't even know. He's got a number of nicknames here, but I'm trying to make some up on the fly as we go here. He is $2,000. I think if you're playing cash games, feels like a pretty easy plug and play there in the 2-hole. Not the greatest hitting environment, and I'm not expecting Vlad Guerrero out of him right off the bat, but so far he's been pretty darn good in AAA. Durham, 323, 376, 601 slash, 7 homers, 35 ribbies, 5 stolen bases even in 38 games. So there's some stolen base upside out of him. What are you looking at from this Tampa Bay side? And then we can also talk about Boston bats as well.
Yeah, so like I said, I do like this spot for Eduardo Rodriguez. So as a stack, I don't really like the Rays that much, but as an individual one-off, it's hard not to like Wander Franco. I'm actually pretty surprised we currently only have him projected for 3% ownership. I tend to think that number has to be higher for a player who, I can't remember when the last time a player getting called up was as hyped as Wander Franco was. And if you look at his minor league numbers, they've always been terrific, not just from a real life perspective, but also from a fantasy perspective. In 39 games so far, in AAA this year, 148 WRC plus. He's hit 7 homers, stolen 5 bases. Looking at his ZiPS projections for the rest of the season, they have him projected to have a 106 WRC plus. So somebody who right away is going to step in and already be 6% above league average in terms of production, with also power upside, stolen base upside. So, with all that in mind, this is a guy who, if you ask me what is Wander Franco's price going to be at the end of the season, guaranteed it's going to be higher than what it is right now. So this is definitely the lowest point to buy in on Wander Franco. And if he's actually only going to be 3% owned, that's just wrong. He should be way higher owned than that. So as an individual hitter, he's going to be one of the players that I have the most exposure to today.
Yep, I like him a lot too. And this is just that classic, like you can like Erod and you can also like a dude who's, I don't know, the number one prospect in baseball who's for whatever reason, minimum salary on DraftKings. So I'm right there with you. And 2-hole, I don't know. He was in the projected lineup this morning at 6-hole, and I was curious what I was going to probably do with him. At the 2-hole, it's hard not to have a ton of interest, especially if we somehow get lucky and that ownership is not there. As we're looking across here too, get access to all the great goodies over at Awesemo Plus. The tools and content for every DFS sport with the weekly pass that's $29.95. And this includes full access to all of the premium content and tools on Awesemo.com, including player projections, ownership, our premium Slack, which people are in nonstop chatting about baseball this morning. I mean, it was fantastic stuff this morning as we broke down some of the winners from last night, the lineup builder, all of those things. And right now, if you use the promo code MLB Deeper Dive, all caps, one word, that's MLB Deeper Dive, you get 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. And of course, if you're looking to only play MLB DFS, then you can sign up now for Awesemo Plus, the weekly package that's starting at $15.95. So stop guessing, start winning and join Awesemo Plus today because it's a good place to be. And again, we've got the top stacks tool. It is free today, but it is not free every day. And that is such a phenomenal thing to have in your arsenal to be able to combat a lot of the improved play that there is in MLB DFS. And that's really how you find your edges nowadays. But let's go across to Toronto, where another wonder kid or wander kid, Vlad Guerrero Jr., MVP boy, plus 107 there. Going into Miami, not the best spot, not the best game or stadium, should I say, going into Miami here. We had Ross Stripling that was like popping up in such a meaningful way that I couldn't wrap my head around it here for Toronto going up against this Miami Marlins team. Sure, there's some Ks there with the likes of Adam Duvall, Jazz Chisholm, but what are you doing with Ross Stripling? Because he's a guy that was popping up a lot higher on our top pitchers tool than what I was expecting.
Yeah, so I mean, just given what the price point is for him and the favorable matchup, he's somebody who I think does make sense as an SP2 on DraftKings. Also, we only have him projected for 6.8% ownership. We do have him in terms of a value pitcher. He's nearly a 30% chance of being one of the top two value pitchers of the day on DraftKings. So that in itself does seem to make him viable. Also, 5,700 for a starting pitcher in a favorable matchup. That's a really favorable price tag. And also Ross Stripling, he hasn't been good this year, but it's not like he's been awful either. 4.64 ERA, 4.58 expected ERA. So looking at a guy who's been somewhere middle of the road to below average, but also keep in mind, he's pitched in ridiculously hitting favorable ballparks. That ballpark in Dunedin, which is basically just a single A ballpark, and we're seeing balls fly all over the place. That was basically like pitching in Coors Field. So I don't know how much we could really count that against him. And then also pitching in Buffalo. That's another minor league park where it's also really favorable for offenses. So, Stripling's numbers this year, they aren't great, except I think there's some explanation for it. And then, like you said, there's still strikeout upside there, striking out 25% of the hitters he faces. And now he's going on the road. He's going to be pitching in Miami with, so he gets to face a pitcher instead of a DH. So for the price point, I like Ross Stripling. I definitely think he's worth being overweight to the field on. The build that I have right now, he's in 18% of my lineup. So that is, about 3x the field right now. That's something I'm pretty comfortable with.
Man, you made a better case for Ross Stripling than I did this morning. That's for sure. I think it makes a lot more sense going from from not just Buffalo, but even Florida earlier this season to a spot in Miami where you do have Ks available. It's not a team that also, not just Ks available, but a 93 WRC plus on the season up against righties, park adjusted factor. Yeah, I really like going to a little bit of Ross Stripling here now at this point. Way to talk me into him right off the bat. And on the other side of the Sandy Alcantara, I don't know. I probably can't get there today up against this Toronto team. It's just too scary. 192 ISO against righties, 111 WRC plus. Do you have any Sandy Alcantara interest today?
I think Alcantara is a very good pitcher. He's a 3.09 ERA this year, a 2.86 expected ERA. His velocity is also way up. Average fastball velocity 97.8 miles per hour this year. But like you said, there's two issues here. Number one, the matchup. And then number two, there's so many good starting pitching options on the slate. So Alcantara is priced up to 8,700, and the opportunity cost of rostering Alcantara, that probably means you're not able to get to guys like Max Scherzer, Lucas Giolito, Freddie Peralta, all these guys that do look like really strong pay-up options. They're not that much more expensive than Sandy Alcantara. So I'd rather pay the extra $1,000-$1,500 to get up to one of those aces. So with that said, Alcantara is somebody who, let's see, I don't have any of them in the build I have right now. I don't know if that'll ultimately be the case that I have 0%, but if it's more than that, it'll only be, like 2 or 3% at most. He's not somebody to really target.
I'm in that camp for sure, I think today, but the Toronto side, they're probably maybe a couple shots on bats. I mean, it's Vlad Guerrero Jr. How can you not possibly maybe have a share or two of him, especially if he's not going to be crazy owned in this spot? It's not a good ballpark by any means, but the guy just absolutely smokes baseballs. And then Bo Bichette, Teoscar Hernandez, possibly spots to take a couple of shots on too. But such a low implied run total here. Maybe not the best spot to be taking any shots, and very, very expensive. 6.7K on DK for Vlad. Hello, that's paying up to be contrarian. No.
Sure. But I think there's a certain point, right, where it's contrarian, but to what means. So it's worth him being in the player pool, I'd say, but still Alcantara is a really tough matchup. It's a lot to pay for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Let me see if I have any exposure to him in the build I have right now. I have him in 2 lineups. So like if he's in your player pool, I'm not going to try to talk anybody out of Vladimir Guerrero Jr., but I don't think he's worth all that much exposure to at this kind of price point. It's so extreme. Alcantara is a really good pitcher, and there's a pretty steep opportunity cost. Like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is more expensive than the starting pitcher for the Toronto Blue Jays today. Who do you think scores more fantasy points more often than not, Vlad or Ross Stripling? Particularly for this slate, I think that the most likely scenario, Stripling probably scores twice as many fantasy points as Vlad, and he's so much cheaper. And obviously, it's not the same position or anything like that, but it's just to put in perspective. It's really hard to really reliably think that somebody at 6,700 is going to be able to win a GPP. Like, he probably has to hit 2 home runs at that price point to win somebody a tournament today. So he's just really overpriced.
Any interest in anybody else in this entire game? I mean, Adam Duvall just hits double dongs. That's all he did all weekend. So any interest in a Miami one-off or something?
Not really. I'm gonna side towards the Stripling side of the game. The other thing, also, a lot of these Miami hitters, especially the good ones, are fairly popular. We have Starling Marte, who, by the way, the ridiculous video that he posted on social media today. But
I didn't see it. What did he do?
He caught like a squirrel or something and attached it to a rocket and shot it up into the air and it exploded. And he posted on it was one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. And he's got like friends around, they're all laughing and stuff. Yeah, I don't know if he's taken it down since then, but I was like, this is like it was like Sid from Toy Story. It was definitely disturbing. But anyway, Starling Marte, he's picking up 13% ownership. He murders rodents. So, I mean, not that is really factored into my analysis here, but I'm going to be on the Stripling side of the game. And then Starling Marte, 13% projected ownership. Jazz Chisholm, 12%. Duvall, you just mentioned him, but he's all the way up at 8% projected ownership. So, to me, these guys are a little bit too popular, and I want to be underweight to all of them.
Same here. Oh my God. I got to find that video. It's not popping up for me on his Twitter here at the moment, but I obviously believe you. I'm going to find that thing. That sounds actually terrifying. But anyway, we've got Atlanta minus 108 going into New York here, facing the Mets. 7 total runs for that game here. I never know what to do with Marcus Stroman. Marcus Stroman just isn't that appealing of a fantasy baseball option for me. Charlie Morton definitely is. I think at his price point, probably one of my favorite guys underneath 8K to get to. Limits hard contact, 26.2% K percentage on the season. This Mets team, it's got a couple of Ks in there. Not a ton. Actually, this entire lineup doesn't project out phenomenally well for me from a K perspective, but still underneath 8K, hard not to have a little bit of interest for me. What are you doing with the pitchers in this game?
Yeah, I very rarely ever roster Marcus Stroman. He's a really, really good real life pitcher, but with that said, just doesn't generate many strikeouts for his career. 19.8% K rate. He is up to a career high 22.2% K rate, which, not all that surprising. His K rate's gone up. He's always pitched in the AL East, and now this year he's pitching in the NL East, so he gets to face pitchers instead of DHs. But even so, that's not really a substantially high K rate. And then if you look at his underlying numbers, they don't really match up with his ERA. So we do have Stroman 2.34 ERA this year, but he's been buoyed by some good luck with only a 2.62 BABIP. He has a 4.26 expected ERA, 3.52 FIP. So probably a little bit of regression coming to Marcus Stroman going forward. And there's a lot of good pitchers on the slate. I just really find him as somebody with a lot of upside.
Yeah, and then Charlie Morton. I did you talk about Charlie Morton there a second ago? Sorry, I just had Ryan send me the video, and I was trying to take a look at it quick and couldn't sneak it in there in between the segments. I tried.
Ryan who?
Rinpack, Rin Pack.
Oh, okay, all right. I didn't know. First of all, I always think of him as Rinpack, but yeah, I didn't realize that he was. I didn't realize that he was sending you videos and whatnot while we're doing this. But
well, I mean, he was trying to be helpful. I had a question. I had a concern. He was being a good friend. That's what friends do, Craig. You'll learn this one day when you have a couple more than helpful. just. Oh, okay. I'm kidding.
Helpful. Why would I ever be helpful? But what? So what, the video anyway. Were you able to watch it?
No, I'm not. I'm not going to be able to pull it up here. I'm worried about my tabs exploding here at this moment in time. I don't want to have producer Jordan behind the glass giving me I don't want that look any more than I already get it, which is probably, 20 times a show. But at this point in time, we're going to keep it rolling. Looking at this lineup here for Atlanta, I mean, what can you say?
Wait. Let's backtrack. You asked me, did I talk about Charlie Morton? I said no. And then you're like, all right, let's go forward. Because Charlie Morton, I think he's somebody we need to talk about here.
Good. I would agree. I love him.
All right. Yeah. I mean, so the matchup against the Mets isn't really ideal, except Charlie Morton. I saw somebody posted this in the YouTube chat. Somebody had said, Mark Curry said, Morton is good every other start kind of guy. And yeah, he's a very high variant pitcher, and he's really cheap also. And there is some ownership going to him, but not anything egregious. 16% right now on DraftKings. Single pitcher site like Fanduel, I don't think there's a real need to consider him. I'd rather just pay up for one of the aces today. But on DraftKings as an SP2, Charlie Morton's a guy who has 4.03 ERA, 4.05 expected ERA. Nationally, that's pretty middle of the road, but it's the strikeout stuff that really makes him appealing to me. 26.2% K rate. Charlie Morton, a lot of times, is either going to strike out, like 8 guys in 6 innings and score like 25 fantasy points, or he's just going to suck and score, like 7 or 8 fantasy points and walk a whole bunch of guys. But that kind of variance and that kind of upside is something that I like in GPPs. So given his price point, he's worth being in the player pool. He's too cheap for somebody with this kind of strikeout potential.
Good. Okay. So now I don't have to redo everything. Atlanta Braves, even up against Marcus Stroman. I mean, Marcus Stroman, good real life pitcher. That low launch angle, 4.9 degree launch angle on the season, that's nifty to see. But there are some hard hits that are coming his way. 47.1% hard hit percentage on the season, 437 expected slugging, and he keeps the walks down. That's a plus. But we know Acuna and Freeman and Albies and all these guys can just smoke a baseball. Maybe some 2 or 3 man, some sneaky spots here in New York. Are you taking that shot at all?
No, because there just isn't that much upside in targeting Marcus Stroman, even if he kind of on both sides, right? Because I said, well, I don't like him from a fantasy perspective, but then even stacking against him, he's somebody who has a really high ground ball rate, 54.7% this year, for his career, 58.3%. So there's very few balls that actually get hit in the air against him. Then given that he's also a quality starting pitcher, it's really hard to generate a whole bunch of upside against him. I'm going to go through his game log really quick, but, I doubt there's very many starts at all in his career where he's really gotten lit up. This year, he's given up 5+ earned runs once the entire season. And then, even if the Braves score 5 runs against him, fine, but that's not like that's some GPP winning performance on a 14-game slate. And that's the most he's given up the entire season. Other recent starts, 2 earned runs, 1, 0, 3, 0, 2, that one with 5, 1, 2, 0. So, there just aren't that many games where he gives up a bunch of runs. And then in terms of home runs, he's given up less than 1 home runs in more than half his starts this year. So very rarely does the ball get put in the air against him. That makes it tough to generate a lot of fantasy upside.
And then on the Mets side, any interest in stacking against Charlie Morton at all, or throwing some one-offs his way?
Not really, because we have the Mets. They have the 4th lowest odds, being the top stack of the day in our top stack stool, but they are still picking up some ownership, at least relative to their odds. We have the Mets today, project for 2.2% ownership share with only a 1.2% chance of being a top stack. So a lot of these teams towards the bottom don't really look all that appealing, because not only are teams like the Mets, the Royals, the Pirates, teams with only a 1% chance of picking up of being the top scoring team of the day, but a lot of them also have, a little bit of ownership, or at least fair ownership. So easy enough for me to just kind of pass on the Mets.
St. Louis and Detroit. We've got, minus 114 for St. Louis, 8.5 implied runs, 4.3 implied runs for both teams on this spot. Kind of the tale of 2 pitchers. I mean, you look at Johan Oviedo, he limits hard contact, but can't strike anybody out and walks a bunch of people. Skubal gives up a ton of hard hits and yet can K people, 27.8% K percentage. But we know there can be a murderer's row of righties in this St. Louis lineup. Kind of one of my favorite sneaky stacks on this entire slate. What are you doing with these pitchers? Because I just can't get to either of them.
I actually don't mind Skubal, although not really. He's not my favorite pitcher of this slate or anything, but he's only projected for 0.6% ownership. And he's somebody who I've actually rostered a little bit this year just because of his strikeout upside. So as a contrarian SP2 option, I have him in 6% of my lineups right now. It's more than the field has, but his numbers this year from a run allowance perspective aren't great. 4.36 ERA, 5.1 expected ERA, but he's a 27.8% K rate. So with that in mind, we've seen starts where he's done really well from a fantasy perspective, especially his last time out was a game where I think Brady Singer was the other pitcher, if I remember off the top of my head. Singer was projected for like 40% ownership, but that's what he ended up at. And then Skubal was only like 8% owned. And then Skubal ended up having a really good game. Singer struggled. And, while it's just one game that I'm looking at, the real takeaway there is that Skubal scored over 20 fantasy points at a low price point. He's now scored 20 plus fantasy points in 6 of his last 7 starts. So, the strikeout stuff, definitely good for him. It's also somebody who started the year pretty poorly and has gotten better as the year's gone on. He's been pretty consistently good over the last month. So I think he's worth more than less than 1% ownership.
Yeah, that was last week. I remember, yeah, you were talking about that. Singer got pulled early from that game, only had 51 pitches. And yeah, you had a ton of leverage going to Skubal in that spot. I will say the unfortunate fact for me there is that he has an 18.7-degree launch angle in the entire season. If he's going to get hit, it's going to get hit pretty hard. So I don't mind maybe having a couple percent of him. I wouldn't mind that at under 1% ownership. And there's definitely some case to be had up and down this lineup with Tyler O'Neill, DeYoung, Carlson, all these guys sitting in that spot. I'm not sure what that projected lineup. Yeah, we've got O'Neill that's for sure in there. Dylan Carlson, Edmonds lower on the end. DeYoung's in the 8 hole now. Man, how far is that guy falling off the map?
Yeah, so he was, let me pull up his numbers from a couple of years ago. Because, yeah, I remember, at least from a fantasy perspective, he was really, really good a couple of seasons ago. Yeah, even from a real life perspective. So, although actually a lot of it came with defensive value because he only had a 100 WRC plus, so right at league average. But still, because of his defense, he was 4.1 wins above replacement. This year, he's just basically been a replacement level player, 87 WRC plus, kind of neutral in the field, or 67 WRC plus, 86 WRC plus last year. So, yeah, he's just been not great this year. He's been a replacement level player.
So I'm going to be going to the top end for my St. Louis exposure, the usual suspects. I will say that it's strange to see such low hard hit percentage for Nolan Arenado, 37.4 here on the season. An expected slugging of only 427. Expecting batting average 259 is a little bit better, but like, my God, it's not the guy that they were kind of expecting to come in there and generate and set the world on fire. But maybe he'll get going a little bit more as we go into the real hot and humid days of St. Louis here. But considering this is in Detroit, not as good, but I'm still going to have some exposure to some of these righties. Anybody bats from either side here before we move on?
Not really. It looks to me like the Cardinals are going over-owned. Also, I think, like I said, I think Skubal is a better pitcher than he's generally getting credit for here. And then, even as is, we have the Cardinals going fairly over-owned here, 6.4% chance of being a top stack, but 7.6% projected ownership. And that's a number that I even think is probably a little bit lower odds of being a top stack just because of my own personal preference towards Skubal and how well he's pitched over the last month. So the Cardinals, to me, are a team to be underweight to the field on, and the Detroit Tigers. That's a team that I rarely think makes sense to stack unless they just have, a really favorable matchup and they have some, like absurd odds of being a top value stack, which we see from time to time and do actually kind of have tonight where they have a 14.4% chance of being a top value. So the only reason I want to get to the Tigers actually has nothing to do with Detroit themselves, but it's just if you're looking for a stack that you absolutely want to pay up for 2 stud starting pitchers, if you're saying that for sure you want to roster, say like Garrett Cole and Max Scherzer in the same lineup, then you could get to the Detroit Tigers and then you hope that, hey, maybe the Tigers score 5 or 6 runs and then the starting pitchers both go for like 35 fantasy points. But the Tigers themselves, there's no reason to really like them for anything other than the price point.
Yep, agreed. Not able to watch your favorite Awesemo shows on YouTube? Almost all of our Awesemo YouTube shows are available through the Awesemo Podcast Network. Head over there. We've got a podcast for every sport, and we're available on every major platform. Head over to awesemo.com/podcast to check out the latest. And if you leave us a 5-star review, which you should because we're fun, on one of our podcasts with your Twitter handle or email address, you'll be eligible to win a free week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. One winner will be awarded every Friday, and reviews will be eligible for up to 1 year. So everybody, good luck. Make sure that you take a look at all of those goodies that we have. Producer Jordan pulled that up on the screen so nicely there. That's where you go. You find all of the goodies and leave those 5-star reviews with your email address. Going across to Cleveland and the Cubbies. We've got Cleveland plus 181, Chicago, it's 9 implied runs. The big key here that you're seeing for Chicago is that the wind is blowing out. It's not as severe as what it was looking like earlier in the day, only 6 miles per hour here going out to left, but we're still seeing some pretty meaningful ownership on these Cubbies. I believe that earlier in the day, they were the second highest owned stack on the slate. They're still third highest. Oakland has really moved up the board here as we progressed, but still going to be having a little bit of interest going to this spot here with the wind blowing out. We know that it can just be 2 kind of completely different stadiums, but I will say one of the more shocking price tags on this entire slate is Kyle Hendricks sitting up at 9,800 over on DraftKings. Not really feeling that so much. Not the kind of pitcher that I like to roster too much. Maybe that's a contrarian spot. He's been very, very good. There's really nothing you can knock in terms of his results, but from a process perspective, not my favorite pitcher to be going to. And I don't think that there's any reason that we need to be talking about one Eli Morgan whatsoever.
I mean, I could knock the results of Kyle Hendricks. He has been better lately, but he was terrible at the start of the season. So his overall numbers for the year, He does have negative wins above replacement. He has a 4.13 ERA, and looks like he's been kind of lucky to even have that ERA, 5.23 expected ERA, 5.36 FIP. So by all intents and purposes, Kyle Hendricks has been fairly miserable for most of the year. He's had a couple of spots where he's gotten blown up, where he was popular, like a start earlier in the season against the Pirates, where he was something like 35-40% owned, and Kyle Hendricks gave up like 7 runs in 2 innings. So to me, Kyle Hendricks is somebody who I do want to stack against here. He's had a bunch of bad starts. He appears to be on the decline. Average fastball velocity is only 87.5 miles per hour this year. He's also over the age of 30 now. So there's some clear signs of decline with Kyle Hendricks, and the Oakland A's have one of the most prolific offenses in baseball. We have them as being very positively leveraged. The Oakland A's have the second best odds of any team on the slate of being the top stack of the day. So 8.3% chance of being a top stack, only 4.6% ownership share. So to me, the A's are my number one priority as an offense right now.
We will get to the A's because we are still on Cleveland and the Cubbies. But you know what? You got a little excited. You got a little excited, and you know what? I've already made fun of you once, so I'm not gonna take this second cheap shot at you here. I will say one Jordan Klein is on top of it though, because he's throwing out numbers. He's now no longer producer Jordan Klein. He is analyst Jordan Klein. 12.79 ERA for Eli Morgan. I try not to look at that stuff too much, but 2.37 WHIP. Yeah, you might want to have some Cubbies in your life tonight.
Yeah, I did get a little bit too far. By the way, I don't like the Cubs because of what their ownership is, but the Cleveland Indians is a contrarian stack. I do like. I don't know why I had Oakland highlighted on my page, but yeah, Cleveland Indians anyways, a contrarian stack is somebody I like to get to given some of the struggles of Kyle Hendricks this year. And now talking about the Cubs side, while they do make sense just from a standpoint of like, hey, are they likely to be one of the top scoring teams of the day? The answer is yes, but they're also 13.2% owned. We have them the 6.4% chance of being a top stack of the day. So then you look at some of the individual hitters. Chris Bryant, 17% projected ownership. Wilson Contreras, 22%. Javi Baez, over 20%. And are these guys that likely to be in the optimal lineup today? I think the answer is no. So, I mean, my preference is to be way underweight to the field on them. There's not a single Cubs hitter right now that I have more than 10% exposure to. Is there anybody here getting to super heavy?
Yeah, I have 18% Jock Peterson hitting in the leadoff. He kind of goes in these waves, and I don't believe in hot streaks, but anytime that he's going to be facing a bad righty with a lot of issues, keeping the ball down through 2 starts, 19.4 degree launch angle, Jock Peterson in the leadoff spot is going to be somebody that I'm going to be over the field to almost every single time. I know that it's a 14-game slate, but as a leadoff hitter, I find it difficult that I won't get some leverage. I don't need to stack up this team. I think going to him, also kind of making a play at, look at the Baez and Contreras and Chris Bryant ownership. Don't really want to be going to that. Jake Marisnick in the 6 hole, just kind of a means of, I don't really even get that. 2,300, I mean, that's the one thing is that he's super cheap, but otherwise I probably don't want to get to a crazy amount of him. We know that he has some pop, had so with the Astros, but Jock Peterson, the one batter that I think I'm probably going to be over the field on, and then it's probably a pass for the rest of this team. What do you think about him?
Yeah, I mean, he's fine. He's 9.5% projected ownership. So at least that is more of a reasonable number compared to Javi Baez, Chris Bryant, and Wilson Contreras all around 20%. I see T. McBee. He threw out in the YouTube chat that he does have Jock as the highest ranked player in his home run model today. So there you go, some confirmation bias. So yeah, Jock Peterson, I'm around even with the field on him, but everybody else I am pretty heavy under just because those numbers are, way higher than I'm typically going to be getting to a stack that's negatively leveraged on a slate this large.
Josh's dad is super, super rad. That's all I have for today. That's my singing and weird voice for the day. Anyway, you want to talk about Oakland so badly, so we're going to move along. I'm just happy that T. McBee and I align there today. Big fan of the Jock Jams. But we are going to be going across to Oakland, -144 in Texas. Looks like the roof is still open there. That's we're on roof watch constantly in a couple of these spots. So I think, let me find it. Yeah, looks like roof is closed. Did you see that the roof is closed as well? Does it really matter to you at this point in time? Because we still are looking at a pretty solid Oakland A's lineup that we want to be having some interest in. Going across to, why is this not pulling up now? We got Irvin and Hearn. I know that those are the 2 pitchers. Then I am going to be talking about Taylor Hearn just bad. 15.6 degree launch angle on the season, 41.4% hard hit percentage, not very good. Cole Irvin, probably another one of those guys you can put in the bucket of why are they priced where they are over on DraftKings. 7,800 makes absolutely no sense to me for a pitcher that right now does not project out very well for me whatsoever. 471 expected slugging, only a 16.4% K percentage up against the Texas Rangers lineup that can do some damage. Eli White up in the 2-hole, that's kind of an interesting spot. A guy with a little bit of speed, 30.5 mile per hour sprint speed. That's kind of nuts, or whatever that ends up projecting out to be over on Baseball Savant. But Greg, talk to me about the pitching.
Yeah, so Taylor Hearn is pretty much just a reliever, and he's going to be working, I assume, just a couple innings or something like that. And then we're going to see Oakland going up against the Texas bullpen. Bullpen this year for Texas has been below average. They have a 4.5 ERA, a 4.14 FIP for the year. So Texas Rangers with a bottom third bullpen in the entire league. So with that in mind, Taylor Hearn himself has struggled, and I don't expect him to pitch all that well when he's on the mound. And then they're going to take him out and put another subpar pitchers behind him. So with that in mind, Taylor Hearn and then the Rangers bullpen, that makes for a pretty favorable matchup for the Oakland A's offense. And the A's have had one of the better offense in baseball. I did jump the gun by talking about them a little bit before because I do like to, I don't usually do this for other sports, but for baseball, I'll look at the run sheet just because when we're doing the game by game, I like to know what game is coming up next. So I know which teams and players to highlight. And I saw Oakland and I'd highlight them and be like, hey, that's a team that's a pretty high priority for me. I want to mention them. And the Oakland A's we do have is the number one most positively leveraged team on the entire slate. So Oakland, I had said it before when we were talking about the Indians, and I thought that we were talking about the A's, but 4.6% ownership share with an 8.3% chance of being a top stack. So Oakland to me is my number one overall highest priority offense of the day.
Absolutely love it. And I like the Texas side of it here too. I thought it was kind of an interesting thing. I didn't really know what to think of it. Eli White was a guy that was kind of buried. I believe he was in the 8 or the 9 hole yesterday, all the way up to the 2 hole today at 2.7K. Has some speed, it looks like. So maybe a spot to be getting to. Adolis Garcia, we know the kind of pop he has. Joey Gallo as well, going up against the lefty, something other people might shy away from. I'm not going to. And Ibanez was a guy who I thought was going to destroy the slate when they went off in that first inning, and he hit that 3-run homer. But do you have any interest on the Texas side as well?
So Texas side, I mean, Cole Irvin, even if he doesn't warrant the kind of price tag he has right now, it's not like he's been a bad pitcher by any means. Texas Rangers, we'd only have with a 2.8% chance of being a top stack of the day. So it's another team where I'd said earlier in the show, when we're talking about, teams in the overall outlook of the slate, there are a whole bunch of teams that just look like they warrant somewhere in the neighborhood of, like 3-4% projected ownership. A 3-4% odds of being a top stack, and that's a round where I'm going to be with them as a stack for the day. And Cole Irvin, 3.89 ERA, 3.86 FIP. His strikeout numbers are really low, so that's what's made him not all that viable as a fantasy option. But he's been good enough to the point where I don't think we want to stack the Rangers very heavily.
All righty. On to San Francisco, which I was talking about with Spags this morning. San Francisco, probably the surprise team of this entire season, just kind of out of the middle of nowhere, just started smoking baseballs again. But we've got San Francisco plus 106 heading into LA. We've got Heaney on the mound on one side for the Los Angeles Angels. On the other side for San Francisco, Anthony Desclafani, who's shown some upside. He's shown some flashes, but also gives up a 44.3% hard hit percentage and keeps the slugging actually pretty far down there. Slugging of 396. Not a huge K pitcher, though, 22.1% Ks. And then Andrew Heaney on the other side does have the Ks, but gives up the hard hits as well. Any pitcher interest? Because I could see myself playing some shares of Heaney anyway today.
Yeah, I always get to some shares of Heaney just because he's never really priced all that highly, just because he's somebody who, from a run allowance perspective, has not had a whole bunch of success this year. He's a 4.45 ERA, 4.14 expected ERA, but his strikeout numbers are so high. Also, very random fact about Andrew Heaney, he pitches every Tuesday. Andrew Heaney only pitches on Tuesday. As I only know because I always do the Tuesday strategy. This is the first time all year I haven't done the Tuesday strategy show. And I have a running joke with Pete McCarthy. Every time we talk about the slate on Tuesday, we look at the pitching matchups. Every day, Andrew Heaney pitches on Tuesday. So I think this is his 6th or 7th or something consecutive Tuesday start, which, listen, doesn't matter. I just kind of found that was a weird coincidence. But from a fantasy perspective, 28.7% K rate, that's really what stands out about Heaney that makes him fantasy viable. Is he's somebody who, when he pitches well, he generates a whole bunch of strikeouts. So Heaney for the year, he's been really up and down because when he is not pitching well, obviously gives up a whole bunch of runs. But if he just has an okay start, he ends up scoring a whole bunch of fantasy points. So here's just his box scores from recent games. Heaney, 30 fantasy points, 4, 32, 6, -4, 16, 27, 26, 13. So it's all over the map, but that kind of upside at his price point makes him somebody to be worth in our player pool on Fanduel and DraftKings, just because there's all that K upside.
Yeah, and I know Gundacker is somebody who's always beaten the drum for San Francisco, playing them against lefties, and I think that there is some truth to that. They've won 11 WRC plus on the season. They definitely K, though, 25.8% K percentage, much higher than what they have up against lefties on the entire season. They've got a much lower mark. Let me find that here. 22.8% K percentage up against lefties. So more upside for lefties, but also can hit up lefties. So this is classic kind of play both sides of it. I don't mind throwing in some Crawford or Belt or whomever else shows up in that lineup there. We've got Belt in the 5 hole there, Crawford in the 7 hole. If you're making your stack and going that direction, I'm not gearing away from anything. It's over 70 degrees. We don't have a ton of like crazy good hitting environments like we've had of late. So LA here with the wind blowing out to right, it's kind of mitigated there, being nearly at sea level in Anaheim. Going to that ballpark quite a bit. I mean, they've shortened that right porch a little bit, which is why you see a lot more homers happening in that direction. But Andrew Heaney could definitely get there. How about from the Angel side? We know the usual suspect that is Shohei Ohtani, who just crushes baseballs in a ridiculous fashion. One of the highest chances of getting a home run today over on OddsShopper. If you go check out all of our home run props over there. But what are you looking at from this Angels lineup against Desclafani?
Yeah, so I mean, Shohei Ohtani as a one-off, he's a viable option, but honestly, this large, Ohtani's projected for 26% ownership today. And while, yeah, I agree with you, he is one of the players who's more likely to home run, and he has actually homered how many games in a row now? So he has homered 1, 2, 3, 5 games in a row, and one of those is a multi-homer game. So for sure, he has decent likelihood of hitting a home run, but that still doesn't mean that I expect him to hit a home run more often than not. And also, that's kind of what he needs to do to be worthy of his current price point. So there are other guys I'd rather pay up for than Ohtani when he's in nearly a third of the field's lineups. So to me, Ohtani worth being in the player pool, but I'm going to be pretty heavy underweight to him. I know that you are a big Ohtani guy, but even at this kind of ownership, are you still getting to him a lot?
No, I'm not. And it sucks. It sucks because I absolutely love him. He's just mispriced for his current level of production. Up against a righty. I mean, he hits both hands well, but I absolutely do not understand why he's only 5,400 when you look at some of the other spots the guys are at. I mean, Ronald Acuna is 6,500. You're paying 1,100 more to get up to him against Stroman. That's wrong. You have the righties and Stanton and Judge. We know that they can smack the ball, but like overall, I just think Ohtani's mispriced at 5,400. He should be more than $100 more than Christian Yelich in this spot. I don't know. It's a spot where I would want to get to at least a little bit of it. Like there's no way that I'm going to even sniff close to 24% or whatever the number ends up being in that number. I'll probably have like 8 to 10. He'll be a one-off that I have. He'll be a part of the stacks that I make for the Angels, but it's just a bummer because he's a guy that I love to play and he's just always treated me pretty well. So I'm right there with you. It's hard to get to that number. Anything else that you want to touch base on from this game?
No, I mean, Shohei Ohtani, sure. If you're playing cash games, just because the ownership is so high and he still does project well, none of the projections are the end all be all for baseball. I think just because he's so popular, you want to have him in cash games, but tournaments, I will be underweight to the field on him.
Man, I have made some time here. We've got 3 games to go, 12 minutes. We'll get the Hall of Fame segment in here after this one. But Milwaukee minus 140 going into Arizona. They have 8 total runs for this game. What can you say? These Milwaukee lefties are just going to be disappointing constantly. I've been beating the drum to not be playing Christian Yelich. I think there were a lot of top players that I was looking around the industry. That was their highest owned batter. And it looks like 5,300 Christian Yelich over on DK. And I believe he's like in the high 3s over on FanDuel right now, constantly gaining a bunch of ownership. He's still hitting the ball hard, but my God, only a 1.3 degree launch angle now for the entire season. It's hard to justify paying up for a dude at 5,300 who just can't hit home runs, only has 3 on the entire season. Kind of makes it difficult to go to. However, Zach Gallen is a guy who gives up a lot of hard contact, 44.7% hard hit percentage. And then Freddie Peralta on the other side. This is a fantastic matchup for him. I feel like he's a guy I haven't even talked about today. What are you doing with the pitchers in this spot?
Yeah, so Zach Gallen, I don't actually mind as a DFS option, although maybe not for this slate, just because there's so many other guys to pay up for that I don't know that I'm going to get to him. I might try to force myself to a little bit of him just because the Brewers are a team that strikes out a whole bunch. He's only projected for 2% ownership, and Zach Gallen is a pitcher this year who He's been okay, 3.99 ERA, 3.67 expected ERA, but it's a 27.1% K rate that does give him a little bit of upside that I think at least makes him worth considering. But if you're only playing a handful of lineups, I'd rather pay up for the more name value studs that we have on the slate, like Max Scherzer, Zach Wheeler, or something like that. But Gallen, to me, he also has had some starts where he's blown up a little bit, and this is a really favorable hitting environment. So I disagree with you a little bit on Yelich just because his ownership is so low on DraftKings today that I think it's worth being overweight to the 6% number. But it's not to make him somebody who I want to get in like 30% of my lineups, but I have him in 12% right now. So I am overweight to Christian Yelich as an individual hitter. But Zach Allen is somebody who I would like to get to, but it looks like just because of the other options on the slate, I don't think I'm going to be able to.
So I'm looking at yesterday's results. He was 15.68% owned in the $5. Obviously, it was a 6-game slate, so that was different. He was 26.7% owned in the 444 over on Fanduel. That's just a spot where I just kind of hit eject on it. Much lower ownership here today. I think if that holds true, probably an all right spot to be going back to him. I just think it'll be a death by a million cuts where he's got to be hitting some doubles, continuing to make hard contact. And I don't know what it is, why he just can't loft the ball up. Back in his MVP season, he was up north of 11-degree launch angle. He's had some seasons where he just basically was hitting ground balls, basically just hitting hard contact regardless. And he can still get by with that and still be elite, but hasn't really shown up in a meaningful way. So that's my main gripe with him there. But anybody else to talk about from this game? Because just kind of meh for me.
Freddie Peralta is a pitching option. He's been excellent, especially from a fantasy perspective. 2.28 ERA, 2.5 expected ERA. His strikeout rate this year, 35.9%. So as long as his ownership doesn't change, we only have him projected for 6% projected ownership right now. I think he's somebody as a good pivot off of, say, Garrett Cole, because Cole today, nearly 40% projected ownership on DraftKings. And with all the concerns with the spin rate, his decrease in strikeouts, it's hard to know where he's really at. And then on FanDuel, Cole's priced all the way up to 11,000. Freddie Peralta is only 9,500. So Freddie Peralta, I think, is a good pivot play off of Cole on the high end.
I kind of agree with you there too. And also, it doesn't even necessarily have to be case. He could go deep into this game, and you've got a team up against right-handed pitching in Arizona, 80 WRC plus, 24.6% K percentage. They're a bad baseball team. They have a bad lineup, and they're not going to be able to hit guys like Freddie Peralta very well. So I'm kind of in line with you there. We've got 2 more to go here to round it out. The Dodgers, minus 112, going into San Diego, into Petco Park, 7.5 run total there in this one. Clayton Kershaw, another guy, if you're talking about pivots, he's got to be somebody that's in consideration there. He's $800 savings off of a guy like Freddie Peralta, although the ownership is basically flat at where he's at, 13.9% chance of being a top 2 pitcher on this slate over on DraftKings. Curious what you think about Clayton Kershaw in the spot against a San Diego team that obviously can hit lefties.
Yeah, I'm not getting to Clayton Kershaw here. The price tag does look favorable, and obviously Kershaw has had a lot of good starts over the course of his career, but he's not the pitcher that he used to be. Also, somebody else who some pretty big concerns about his spin rate and the dip in recent games ever since baseball changed the rules. And if you look at Kershaw for the year, 90.8 average fastball velocity, by far the lowest of his career, down a few miles per hour for his actual career average. The results are still pretty good for Kershaw, 3.36 ERA, 3.2 expected ERA. But I just don't know that he has the same upside of some of the other studs on this slate. And the other thing to consider also is that the Dodgers are generally pretty conservative about his pitch count. So, with that in mind, I don't think it's all that likely that he outscores some of these other top end studs on the slate. So at some point we have to make a cutoff in terms of who we want to get to. And I prefer Freddie Peralta, Lucas Giolito, Max Scherzer, Zach Wheeler. A lot of these guys I think are better pitching options than Clayton Kershaw for the slate. So also obviously the matchup is a concern. So no Kershaw for me.
And you were kind of hoping to get a catcher that could strike out there. Webster Rivas, only an 18.2% K percentage on the season. That's not going to be very helpful because Grisham and Myers and Fernando Tatis are your 3 guys that you're kind of looking at there. But Myers and Tatis can definitely hit righties. So it's a problematic spot, I think, for Kershaw. And as you said, maybe not the most K upside out of him there. On the other side, Blake Snell, not the guy that we wanted him to be this season, that's for sure. If you bought into him like I did in year long, what a dunce. 30.4% K percentage. Not going deeper into games, getting pulled early in some of these spots. It's just kind of like hit or miss. They're very, very quick to pull the trigger on him. It's very similar to like what Tampa Bay did with him here, but I'm not really even sure if I can get to any of him up against this Dodger lineup. I'm not sure what that is yet. We don't have the Dodger lineup. That's going to be hit and miss, but guys like Pollock, Souza, Pujols has been serviceable and does not strike out. Any Blake Snell interest?
No, there's so many options, and Snell has had such a weird drop off this year. I mean, he's just flat out been bad. He has a 5.72 ERA, a 5.3 expected ERA. He can't throw strikes at all this year. So his walk rate 13.2%. He's somebody who's struggled with control at times, but this has gone to another even extreme. And the Padres have reportedly they're going to try to limit his pitches and how deep he works into games all season. So it's been very rare that we've even seen Blake Snell make it through 5 or 6 innings. So I don't know what the issue is here, but this is somebody who's a former Cy Young winner who just a year ago even he had a 3.24 ERA, 4.04 expected ERA last year. Wasn't quite his ERA season, but I mean his Cy Young season. But 2018 he was legitimately one of the best pitchers in baseball, and he's so far removed from that now. So Blake Snell, maybe if we get to a point where his price point comes down that actually reflects how he's pitched this year, we'd say, hey, there's strikeout upside. But he still continues to be fairly expensive.
I have a little bit of Blake Snell interest, if only because out of his 10 starts this year, he's had 2 of them in Coors Field. He's been on the road for 7 of his 10 starts. Going into Petco, it's a little bit better environment. Again, this is not a phenomenal matchup, but the Dodgers lineup is still watered down. It's still a watered down Dodgers lineup in a lot of ways. And I'm not sure what to make about the pitch count is really kind of my major concern. And it is a massive slate, but we just saw them get ringed up by 11 by Yu Darvish, obviously a righty, not a lefty. I just think that there could be a little bit of bias that we have towards the 2 Coors Field for a guy who we know is his primary pitch. He does throw a 4-seamer a higher percentage of the time than you'd think, 47.6%, but 20.4% of the time he's throwing the slider, the curveball 15.4, the change 16.6. I don't know. I think there might be some hidden upside for him there. I'm willing to take a couple shots just because it's Blake Snell at super low ownership. And, I'm not sure if the sticky stuff, I mean, that's definitely not going to be a plus for a guy like him, but I don't know. He's cheap enough that I might be willing to take a shot or two there. Talking about this Dodgers lineup, if you're not going to be playing Snell, do you have some interest going to bats on the other side of it? Pretty low implied total for them though.
No, I mean, here's the issue with Blake Snell. He hasn't worked very deep into games. The Padres do have one of the best bullpens in baseball behind him. So, Blake Snell, and I agree with you also. I still believe in the talent of Blake Snell, not to the point where I want to go out and roster him on a slate of this size, but I'm not really dying to stack against him either. And, there's a good chance that he pitches 4 decent innings and the Padres go to their bullpen behind him. And, I understand the Dodgers were able to that yesterday there were some, more runs scored than expected in the spot. Julio Urias ended up pitching poorly, and maybe we see something similar happen to Blake Snell, but on the opposite side. But yeah, no real interest in stacking against him, but I don't really want to roster him either.
And then Padres bats, they were kind of the winners of the day. Fernando Tatis, Manny Machado, we talked about them at length. You ready to move on?
Yeah, I mean, we only have 2 minutes left, so I think we kind of have to, right?
Yeah, we should probably do that. Colorado plus 146 going into Seattle. 8.5 implied runs for this game. Colorado 3.7 implied runs. Seattle 4.8. Seattle is a team that I thought was going to be sneaky coming into today. That didn't end up really coming to fruition that much, but they're getting owned nearly 10% or right around 10% ownership share for them over on DraftKings. Only a 4.6% chance of being a top stack. That was kind of surprising to me to see that the field was already going to be there. Maybe I shouldn't have been, but this is kind of a team. If you're looking for a value stack going up against this, I mean, I don't ever bring up ERA. I very rarely do. Kyle Freeland. It's just kind of hilarious looking at his numbers though. 9.58 ERA. In his 5 starts this season, 2.27 whip. I mean, it's hard not to have a little bit of interest with bats against him, but talk to me about him and then flexing on the other side.
Yeah, so with Seattle, the real issue I have here is, like you said, it's not necessarily a bad spot. We do with a 4.6% chance to be a top stack, which is pretty middle of the road for this particular slate. But there is so much ownership going to this team. We have them with about 10% projected ownership. So this is expected to be the 3rd most rostered offense on the slate. Only the Astros and the Cubs are projecting for more ownership. So with that in mind, the Mariners are not a team I want to get to when they're this popular. So to me, not somebody I'm really interested in. Flexen, who's going to be starting for them today, he's been somebody who has struggled a lot. And, He has not had, he's not had very much success from a fantasy standpoint because he only has a 15.9% strikeout rate. So to me, flexing, I definitely don't want to get to him as a pitcher either, and moderate interest in stacking against him.
Yeah, because the Rockies are dead last with 71 WRC plus against righties on the entire season. Pretty much the entire game a write-off, no?
Pretty much. That's like you said, the Rockies don't have a great offense. I'm a little more inclined to get to them than roster Chris Flexen, just because I don't see any of the strikeout upside in Flexen, but that's not really saying much.
Out with a whimper. Sounds great to me. Greg, any final words for the people for this 14-game slate?
No, if you haven't done so already, like the video, subscribe to the Awesemo YouTube channel. Also, stick around because MLB Live Before Lock is coming up next.
You're doing my job for me. I love it. I was going to say, it's nice to be on the host side of it. Let you be the analyst. Great stuff from you, as always. We've got MLB Live Before Lock coming up next with Spags and Terry McBride, 5 p.m. Eastern time here. And then NBA Live Before Lock for the game tonight, Lofty and Josh. That is starting up at 7:45 p.m. Eastern time. I'm Eric. He's Greg. Best of luck tonight, guys. And gals.
What is up, guys? It is time for a little MLB Live Before Lock, where we will take you through the finer points of this 14-game slate. We're not going to go game by game because, as you saw, that is a lot of work, and I'm not into doing that at all today. But I am Chris Spags, joined by a man who's responsible for all of our customer success at Awesemo.com. He's also on Twitter at DigitalB21. He's Terry McBride. How you doing, Terry?
Doing pretty good, buddy. Doing good. It's been a nice day to get into this baseball slate. I wrote like 3,500 words for it on my article today. Went a little bit overboard, but you guys can check that out on the site for free. And yeah, psyched to get into it coming up in the lock here with most of the lineups confirmed. Hell of a pitching slate. Should be a fun one.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the pitching up top here. Then we'll talk about the top stacks in the back half of the show. And in between, we will have a little bit of money time. I'll flip the hat, give you guys the top 5 owned plays on Draftkings and Fanduel for free. So right now, I don't want to do the Josh thing. I don't want to throw my coworkers under the bus. I love Eric. I love Greg, but I have to say this like count is a travesty, a bastardization of what we do on YouTube. So here's what I need you guys to do is hit that like button right now. We got 540 people in the room right now, only 93 likes. I feel like we can get to 150 50 right now if we pull together as a team. So hit that like button, please, and get it up to a respectable number here. It's also show love for Eric and Greg, who did do a great job there, even though Eric, look, you can't get the likes without the puppet. I think we all know that about our pal Eric Lindquist. Also, make sure today, if you have some time on your hands, or even if you don't, go play over at No House Advantage, who is a sponsor of this show. And they are, of course, bringing prop betting to a DFS format for all of you guys out there. And if you haven't played them for MLB, it's a different game than NBA. Obviously going to be not quite as reliable to project over and over again, but that's where the fun is on No House Advantage, where if you apply some of the concepts like stacking on there, take the over the 0.5 hits for, to me, the Seattle Mariners, intriguing team to get some of those guys on No House Advantage today. But go over there, check them out, and use the promo code Awesemo, because they'll give you a deposit match of anywhere now from $20 to $50. So you can deposit $50 and get a $50 deposit bonus on there. And that's new for No House Advantage as well. So go play over there. It's a very fun site to play on, and it's prop betting in a DFS format. So you're just breaking your picks from 10 to 1, and then you'll be entered to compete against everybody else in the field here. So go check them out, No House Advantage, and use that promo code Awesemo. They'll deposit match you $20 to $50 on there. So go check that out for yourselves. But let's talk about this slate, Terry, and let's get into the pitching up top. You mentioned it's a strong pitching slate, and we are going to have a variety of options, some of whom have been affected by some of the spin rate issues. So let's talk about that one up top, Terry. And I don't know if this is something you're following as closely as our pal Greg Ehrenberg, but I know we're all paying attention as best we can. Is there anybody for you, and Garrett Cole's going to be the obvious name, but is there anyone you're looking at today and maybe having some shade of concern just over the crackdown here in MLB of coaches or managers rather being able to ask for a pitcher to be looked at? Is there anybody who fits that criteria that maybe you're giving a downgrade to today?
I mean, not in terms of anything I'm adjusting projections for. Is it something that's on my radar? Absolutely. Is it something I want to see what happens with guys like Garrett Cole, who are kind of dead in the center of this entire thing? Absolutely. We saw Jake DeGrom was the first guy called out on it the other day. I think we're very, very likely to see Garrett Cole get challenged here. And I think if he comes back with anything on his hand, he's an idiot, right? I mean, anybody at this point in this investigation, in this whole, crazy thing that's going on, pitchers have been doing this since the dawn of time in baseball. Everybody has to remember that. It's just being focused on now because guys are emphasizing spin so much, and there is an advantage to be gained. But guys have been using tack on their hands since the dawn of time. So it's an interesting line that they have to walk. But anybody who gets caught in this situation, this start, is just an idiot. I don't think Garrett Cole or any of these other guys are idiots. I don't think they're going to walk right into that. So I don't think we're going to see somebody get tossed, and I don't think it's something we can quantify yet in terms of adjusting projection for it. I think we need to give it more time in the sample, see how it adds up in the overall spin rate over time and what that does to numbers, particularly when you're talking about an apex pitcher like Cole.
Yeah, I think that we do have some pitching options here that Garrett Cole certainly going to be the obvious one, but some other guys that I'm with you. I think the approach that you're mentioning here, you kind of have to take these guys at face value. And Yu Darvish would have also definitely been a guy that people would have been worried about in yesterday's slate. And I know it because I was doing the shows for it and saw people asking about Yu Darvish and vocalizing some concerns about him, especially after having some down days recently. And I feel like the one guy maybe you could point to having more risk relative to other pitchers on the slate would be going to a Blake Snell. And that's one guy who historically has, just been up and down this year. And you could sort of point to that as maybe being something to watch out for. But overall, relative to the slate, I think you have to treat it reflecting the Awesemo actual player projections today, as well as the ownership. And it is going to be still gravitating towards the stars today. So if you want to do your own special sauce at home because you feel like there's a media narrative around and you just want to fade the guys, but I just wanted to cover it up top here because I know whenever these things are ESPN headlines over and over again, people sometimes do get cause for concern, and that can be something that can talk you off of plays that are actually good.
Sure. And look, most of those conversations are focused around the star-like players like Garrett Cole and like a Yu Darvish and guys of that profile, because, hey, those are the guys that fill sports writers' times. Those are the guys that get clicked on in headlines and things like that. So a lot of the focus is going to be on those guys. And if it's drawing ownership off of those guys, that's to our gain in DFS, I think. And if it's going to draw more attention and put people on like a Marcus Stroman or these guys in the mid-range or like a Kyle Hendricks or somebody like that, so much the better. Let people make those mistakes and adjust for it when we don't know what it means and when we don't know how to adjust for it yet. Speaking of Blake Snell, though, is he somebody that's on your radar? Because I agree that the spin rate narrative could hit him, but he's also somebody who's not really on my board for the matchup and for the question mark about the innings. I'm curious how much you're getting to him since you mentioned him.
No, yeah, he's a guy that to me, I was already a little bit, I was curious about this morning, honestly. I mentioned him on the strategy show as being a guy that I thought at the price tag would be more appealing, but I think there are ways to work around it. So to me, I ended up actually not getting there as much. And I think the concerns, not just with the spin rate, but the matchup as well. And the fact that he does take a little bit longer than I would generally like to see from guys to finish off the at-bats. When you combine that with a 13% walk rate, I think there's enough cause for concern when you do talk about the pitch count as well. I think there's some reasons there that for me, Snell wouldn't be a guy. And just want to point out real fast too, because this wasn't just us talking theoretically either. David Vite in the chat, or David Vite, sorry if I mispronounced it on both those tries, saying, yep, faded Darvish and it cost me. That is something that, just want to keep in mind out there, is that, for baseball in particular, trusting the longer term sample size. I was reading a Fangraphs paper on ISO stats yesterday, and basically they're saying like ISO stats for the most part don't have a ton of value until you see 550 at bats. With a sport like baseball, you're just looking for that longer term sample size, and you can sort of, nickel and dime the stuff. You can go in Baseball Savant and look at spin rates, but generally you are going to be trying to treat these guys close to the median projection. And just an important conversation, I guess, to have for DFS, because sometimes people, I think, are trying to get a little cuter, as we talked about here. Talk to me about Max Scherzer.
I said it a lot. Sorry, just to round that point off, I've said it a lot in terms of how I look at numbers. And to me, if you don't bring me 1,000 plate appearances, it really doesn't mean that much. And there are certain stats within that normalize faster than others, of course. But a stat like ISO, just in the way that I create my home run model and my projections and everything, that washes through. It's either 1,000 or 2,000 league average plate appearances in a regression formula that I have over the past 10 years. So it's a big regression that I run on numbers like that to get to what I use in the actual projections here. So yeah, some of those numbers get really, really overblown really quickly. And a lot of baseball takes a ton of numbers and a ton of sample to really add up to anything at all meaningful.
Yeah, and that's why when we talk about BVP and get those questions in chat, we try to steer you guys toward the longer-term sample size, and that's the best you could do in baseball. And speaking of longer-term sample size, now we have the graceful transition over to Max Scherzer, who has got probably the longest sample size of anybody we'll see on this slate. Thankfully, no Rich Hill today, so I can say that claim with a good amount of confidence. But Scherzer in the spot, Terry, the price tag for him, I guess, still going to be about as high as anybody else on the slate for the most part. But he is in a spot here against Philadelphia, a team that, to me, I just feel like there are some times I worry about going against Philadelphia, especially when they are facing a left-hand pitcher. Talk a lot about how Rhys Hoskins is just one of those guys, reverse splits, always put him there, including when I went to a game last week. I got there late, missed Rhys Hoskins hitting a home run off of Clayton Kershaw. That's how good he is against left-hand pitching. But overall in the year, Terry, this Philadelphia lineup, a 25.2% K rate against righties, 140 ISO. It is a humid day, actually a really humid day in Philadelphia, 90% humidity, but the weather overall only 66 degrees. And Scherzer, I think you can always point to the cause for concern. I think Eric and Greg talked about it on the show before us. High launch angle for Max Scherzer, 21 degrees for him. High fly ball rate as well at 52%. So he is kind of asking people to hit home runs off him. But you see that 36% K rate, and you see this matchup against Philadelphia, just not that good. It's hard to argue Scherzer being, to me, I think the play relative to ownership and price, the one that I want to get to the most on DraftKings. And I like Garrett Cole, have no issue with him, but Scherzer, I just feel like fits the appeal a little bit more. So how are you feeling about him? And are you feeling the same way on FanDuel today?
Yeah, I am. He's pretty high ranked on my board. I like the matchup a lot. I think it's a sneaky good matchup. People think of Philly kind of like what you were saying in terms of being better. They're definitely better against lefties in terms of the power, but I think people think this is a better offense than they've been so far this season. So we just talked about what some of the samples mean in terms of like ISO, but for the season, their compiled team ISO, which we've got well over 1,000 plate appearances at this point, is just a 140. They're striking out, like you said, 25.2% of the time. That's ninth worst in baseball. They're creating runs 14% under average, just a 2.94% home run rate in the split against righties. So there's a good reason to go to Scherzer here, despite any maybe concerns about the launch angle. The average exit velo, 38th percentile on the season, but the hard hit rate, 68th percentile, expected slugging, 71st percentile. And he's one of those guys, if he's going to get dinged for a home run, it's more likely to be like a solo shot, maybe a 2-run shot, and not really cost him where he's going to have a bunch of guys on base and then give up a bunch of runs in other ways through sequential hitting and putting guys on base. He's just not that pitcher. 91st percentile in walk rate, 94th percentile strikeout rate. He's an excellent, excellent option. And he's on the board in terms of the overall price tag. He's cheaper than Zach Wheeler. He's cheaper than Garrett Cole on the FanDuel slate. So I kind of like that. And he was also not necessarily on the board. So people that read things early today, he wasn't listed and confirmed as the starter, even though he came down in some, like I get my information for probables from Fangraphs, and he came down with that. but other people that were looking elsewhere might not have had him on the radar. So he might not be as much in the public mind. He's certainly drawing plenty of ownership, but maybe he's not at the forefront of some people's expectations, depending on where they get their info today too.
And the main thing that jumps out to me too is he's going to be less owned than Garrett Cole, but have a higher chance to be a top pitcher today. And that's something, top pitchers tool we talk about. The top stacks tool is actually free today. So if you want to check that out and play along for yourself, whether it be for Fanduel or Draftkings, you can check that out on the site as well. But in the spots, me, I think Scherzer is the guy that I just want to go to the most. And the slight price discount on a slate this big, I think you can sort of justify it and go into Scherzer and finding it more appealing. And again, just the raw median projection as well looks better according to, the DK salary or DK points as well. The value metrics can look better because of the salaries involved. So for me, Max Scherzer just seems like a play that I can get to at volume. That said, I don't want to speak ill of Garrett Cole. I think he's a fine play. The issue really to me is going against Kansas City. I think just comes a little more, I wouldn't even say risk, but just some more potential here that they can drag out the at-bats and make it tough on Cole. And especially if Cole is effective with the spin rate stuff too, we could play both sides here. I could talk about the narrative here as a reason to not go to Garrett Cole in honor of my name, Max Scherzer, or my man, Max Scherzer. But Cole in the spot, I think he's a perfectly fine play, but you see the 22% K rate for the Royals against right-hand pitching on the year. And also, conditions to Yankee Stadium, another humid park, and a Royals team that I think has enough bats that could take advantage of it. It's the order's not the most impressive when you get down the line, but you still have Sal Perez, you have Ryan O'Hearn, who should always be better for power than he's been historically. Whit Merrifield, a competent hitter. Carlos Santana's got enough power as well. I think there's a pathway for Cole to, not have the best day here, and that's why I would go a little bit under on him relative to the ownership. But how are you feeling about Garrett Cole, Terry? You mentioned a little more of a price tag going on FanDuel as well as on DraftKings. Is he a guy that you are getting to with the field?
Probably not with the field, much as I might like to. I thought he was going to be a little bit more pay up to be contrarian, maybe with some of the narrative around him. And to your point, the matchup is not great. Kansas City hasn't been great in terms of power and run creation overall on the year, but the 22.1% strikeout rate is excellent. That's fourth best in baseball in the split. Limited power, like we said, 145 team ISO, 2.86% home run rate. Cole has some quality of contact issues. It's kind of it comes in hard, so it goes out hard kind of a way, 97 mile an hour average on the fastball, but does have some concerns around the hard hit rate. So he's another guy, kind of like what I said about Max, where unlikely that a bunch of guys are going to be on base given his overall walk rate and how good he is at that aspect of the game. But they might take him out of the yard, might hit him for a solo home run or two. Not entirely safe. And then there's the good ability by this team to limit the strikeout. So probably a lot of balls in play. But I do get a good projection on him. It would just be about the ownership. Approaching 30% ownership on FanDuel, I think I just prefer Max at half the ownership, even though I get him slightly lower in terms of my raw fantasy point projection.
Another stud here, and again, this is a slate with a lot of them, so we're going to try to cover these guys here up top. And Lucas Giolito, I think, and this is part of why, too, I don't mind coming a little bit under on Garrett Cole is to fit the theme here. I'd like to pay a little bit less to go to Max Scherzer. I'd like to pay a little bit less to go to Lucas Giolito. And I think, to me, something with his ownership where it's at 30%, it's not the greatest strikeout matchup going against Pittsburgh, who has a 22.4% K rate on the year against right-hand pitching. But Giolito, that's the same matchup that Cole has, and I don't think the strikeout stuff is going to be that much, further off for Giolito. 31% K rate for him on the year. The swinging strike rate as well, 16% is basically, pretty close to where Cole is, or at least enough so that to me it's a negligible difference. And Pittsburgh, there's no danger here, I think, coming back. It's not a humid day. It's not a hot day. And Pittsburgh overall, not that good. Brian Hayes is really the only one that I could ever look at this lineup and go, yeah, that guy's somebody you got to watch out for. Like, Brian Reynolds, a solid hitter, but not the power guy. He's going to put the fear of God into you by any respect. And Giolito, he does give up the high launch angle, but if you don't have anybody to take advantage of it, I think he's a decent play. Ownership's a little lofty still, but in this spot, Terry, I feel like Giolito, a really viable pivot and a good way to save, $1,500 and probably get, I think, a comparable outcome here as you would a Garrett Cole.
Yeah, absolutely. Giolito, actually the overall highest projected pitcher on my personal board. I know he's one of our top ranked starters on the overall board. And coming in, he's another guy coming in with more ownership weight on him than his probability of being a top starter on FanDuel, but we've got a pretty wide range of starters overall over there. On DK, I prefer the ownership. I like it coming in a little bit under 30%, so it's appealing on both sites. And I think you're absolutely right. Everything that you said, the Pirates are a very limited offense. They've got a 129 ISO against righties and a 2.39% home run rate, which is second worst in baseball. What they do well is limit the strikeouts. 21.4% strikeout rate in the split is second best in baseball. So maybe they cap that upside, but Giolito is just good enough. 14 starts, 81 and 2/3 innings so far. So he gives you nice depth. Great chance at the win and the quality start here. 15.9% swinging strikes. Like you said, in line with those other premium starters in terms of the strikeout rate. Love the price on DK. He's only at 9,400. I think you're getting a discount comparatively there. And I think he's a pretty good option, even though there's some ownership at 10-5 on FanDuel. So I would definitely get to him. I don't know that I would, press beyond the field. The field's at 16.1 now. He was higher than that. It looks like Max chewed up some of the ownership on FanDuel. So I think I'd be at or maybe slightly above the field on FanDuel on him. I like the option a lot.
Yeah, on a slate where there's a lot of pitchers here that, again, with Cole in particular, I'm willing to shave some ownership off. I think to me, getting to the field's 30% on DK. I really don't have an issue with it. It is a little bit over leveraged according to the top pitcher tool standards, where he's got a 19.2% chance of being a top pitcher. But to me on the slate, I just feel like Giolito, I find it hard to believe he gets killed here, which I think can be a value at his price tag. And he's going to find some strikeouts, even if the matchup isn't that great on paper. Zach Wheeler is the last stud I think we really need to talk about here and get to at some depth. And he's been fantastic on the year as well. 31.6% K rate, not quite as good of a swinging strike rate guy as Giolito is, but a 13.4% rate, 35% chase rate too. And these numbers are not so big over his previous numbers since 2019 that you'd expect them to be an aberration. But Wheeler's just been solid on the year, Terry. I feel like this matchup, I think, always going to give you some fear with a top four: Schwarber, Turner, Soto, Bell, all guys who can do damage, either taking you out of the park or just making your all-around day miserable, like Turner and Soto as the most out of those guys. But the bottom order here is so bad with Yan Gomes, Starlin Castro, Josh Harrison, Victor Robles. None of these guys really are going to scare me at all. And Scherzer himself, certainly a easy strikeout rate guy too, 38% K rate for him since 2019 against right-hand pitching. I don't mind Wheeler. And I think, the ownership has come up enough where he's basically, level with all these other guys at 23%. But I still feel like as a play, I'm comfortable getting to the field and maybe even a little bit above it on Wheeler, just because of the fact that the field's not going to be there as much. And I don't know that's the move, Terry, but I do feel like Wheeler, if he's going to be the least owned out of that quad group, or that quadrant of pitchers that we're talking about here, I don't mind taking that stab, because this pitch count, a 101 average pitch count, is a really nice number to go to.
Yeah, definitely part of the quadrilateral of pitching excellence here, I guess.
Parallelogram, maybe.
So I like him. I like him a lot at that 10-2 price on DK, with only the 20-ish% ownership on him. 11-4, he's a pay up to be contrarian kind of option. Under 10% ownership on FanDuel. One of my highest projected pitchers. I think it's a very good spot for him. He projects really strongly. What I really like about him, 96 1/3 innings in 14 starts. That's a second overall in terms of total innings to Aaron Savali, who made his 15th start last night, and he's only 4 outs ahead. So he's been excellent for depth. He's given you 11 quality starts and 14 tries. That puts him tied for third in the league with a handful of guys. Just been really, really good. 31.6% strikeout rate, just a 5.9% walk rate, 2.82 xFIP, a 0.93 whip on the season, 13.4% swinging strikes induced. He's around average called plus swinging strikes, but the swinging strikes are up above average. So that's the skill of it. Maybe could throw a few more called strikes. 95th percentile average exit velo against, 92nd percentile hard hit rate allowed, 82nd percentile barrel rate allowed, 90th percentile expected slugging percentage against. He's just been so good, avoiding premium contact, everything you want. Nats, the one thing they're doing well in this split, 8th best in baseball, 22.7% strikeout rate. They struggle with power and run creation, though. 10% below average run creation, a 145 team ISO, and just a 3.13% home run rate. So I think it's a sneaky good spot for Wheeler. I'm happy to pay extra for him on FanDuel if I'm getting away from ownership here.
So, okay, one player that we have to talk about that our pal Eric Lindquist heard me my brain freeze when going through this morning on the show, because I'd missed his projection during my initial scan of everything. Ross Stripling on DraftKings from us today projects for 18 fantasy points, which would be the best value mark. And according to the top pitchers tool, Ross Stripling can have a 28% chance of being the top value pitcher on the slate on DraftKings. On FanDuel, maybe you might make a slight case to get there, though. I'm curious your thoughts, because it does feel like it's perhaps a bit of a stretch for him to get a quality start, but a 25% K rate for Stripling, playing in Miami. Roof going to be closed here after we weren't sure if that was going to be the case this morning either. And he is facing a Miami team, a 25% K rate on the year against right-hand pitching, because of Alcantara being in there, and a 73% K rate for him. I had that as a 30% K rate for this team overall since 2019. Stripling is not a good pitcher, Terry, and I think I have a lot of reservations taking a guy with a 12% barrel ball rate, a 16-degree launch angle, basically giving you, some of the ideal hitting conditions to go against him. That said, at now 4% ownership, I don't see how you don't get above the field on Ross Stripling with that projection we have for him. So what do you think about Stripling? And are you buying this 18 fantasy point projection that I really was taken aback by when I saw it first thing in the morning?
It seems aggressive to me. I understand, I guess, how we're getting there. I've got him at a 25.5 projection on FanDuel, so it's not like I'm way behind in terms of where the site's seeing him. For 7,600 on FanDuel, he just wasn't really on my board. It doesn't look like he's much on the public board either. Could he give us a good start here against an improving Marlins lineup? Sure. But there are definitely some spots in that lineup that could get to him. And I'm thinking of Adam Duvall, even righty-righty. I don't mind that. Jesus Sanchez hasn't proven anything yet, but that's a premium left-handed bat, just an up-and-comer that people should keep their eye on, hitting late in that lineup. And then you have Starling Marte, and I don't know if you saw his Twitter video that's going around right now, but apparently he likes launching rodents into space on bottle rockets. So we'll see if he's in the lineup over the next couple of weeks. But he's in there today. Jazz Chisholm leading off. It's an interesting lineup. So I don't love the spot for Stripling, but at that price on DK and that low ownership, I think he makes sense just as an SP2, just in terms of a DFS play. Whether it works out or not, I think it's a spot to get ahead of just because it could work out. I think that for me, I prefer Eduardo Rodriguez on both sites as a value play. I think he's in a sneaky good matchup against the Rays there that we'll get to as a lefty. I know he hasn't been good in terms of earned runs, but everything else for him has been there. So that's been my value guy on the day. He's a little bit more. He's 6,400 as compared to 57 for Stripling on DK. So if you need the savings, go to Stripling. If you're looking for another premium value guy, I like the spot better for Rodriguez.
Yeah, Stripling, I'm surprised to see the ownership be at under 5% projected ownership. And that's something to me, I don't mind getting there a little bit more. Again, at a 27.9% chance being one of the top value pitchers on DraftKings. And you have studs, you have other guys in the mid-range you can get to, but I would get, for myself, I feel like 15 to 20% Ross Stripling isn't the craziest move. And I think it's a hard thing to say out loud when doing a show like this one, but it's one you do have to say. And Eduardo Rodriguez, I'm with you though, is a more reliable play. I feel like I would also throw Charlie Morton in the mix too, as a guy who's just underpriced on DraftKings. But Eduardo Rodriguez, 27% K rate facing a Tampa Bay team that does have a 28.4% K rate on the year against left-hand pitching. Also a shockingly low 139 ISO against left-hand pitching and a 298 on base percentage, where probably not a lot of guys are going to force, long at bats either. You would hope not to see if these guys aren't drawing walks. And Rodriguez, I agree, is the play too. 7% expected ownership. I am surprised to see the lack of value pitching being taken today. I guess would be the main thing for me on DraftKings, because I have no issue going to these guys. But Eduardo Rodriguez, give me your thoughts on him, because I agree that he's a very solid play unless Wander Franco is going to completely change everything around for the Rays. They're just not that good of a team against lefties.
Yeah, and that's really what it is for me. I know he's been bad in recent starts in terms of earned runs, in terms of the back of the baseball card type stuff. 32 earned runs in his last 8 starts. Stretch over which he completed the 5th inning. I'm kind of reading this. Over which he completed the 5th inning only 3 times. Posted neither a win nor a quality start in that stretch. So he's been bumpy in terms of the earned runs, but everything else, he's been really unlucky. If you look game by game, most of those games are way over 400 batting average on balls in play against. Just getting some premium contact coming through the infield and drop, some ball dropping in. His xFIP has been steady for the season. He's at 3.38 xFIP, totally solid. 66 and 2/3 innings over 13 starts. You can quibble with the length, but that's again because some of those batting average on balls in play numbers, which also play into the 1.47 WHIP that people are seeing. I'm all about the xFIP, the 26.8% strikeout rate, and then the matchup. But he's also 74th percentile in hard hit rate, 65th percentile average exit velo, 12th percentile in maximum exit velo. Walk rate ranks in the 80th percentile. He's league average of avoiding barrels, but those two combine pretty well. 51st percentile of avoiding barrels, so dead in the middle of the league. Tampa Bay, like you said, 27.9% strikeout rate, 4th worst in baseball against lefties. I have him at a 128 team ISO in the split, which is worst in baseball. The Rangers being 2nd worst at a 132, then it goes to a 137 and a 142 for the Pirates and Tigers in the split. So that's worked by far. 2.60 home run rate in the split. There's a lot of premium indicators for Rodriguez here. He could absolutely get lit up. He could absolutely get some sequential hitting, give up some power. I don't know, but for that price and for that low ownership, I'm willing to take some shots on it. I think it's a sneaky good spot.
And one other cheap pitcher, I did mention Charlie Morton, but one guy who's also even cheaper that I can also, I think, justify taking some stabs at. And Terry, I'm curious to see your reaction to this one. But if I'm taking stabs at Ross Stripling and I have some vague concern that he might be a little higher owned, I don't mind taking absolutely no ownership on Chris Flexen, just because of the matchup going against Colorado. 3.7 implied runs, not the biggest total. Also, the weather here shouldn't be that much of a detriment to what Flexen's doing. Flexen only a 16% carried on the year, not good, but he's 5,500 on DK. It's throwing 89 pitches. And the thing for me that I've really tried to make more comfort with playing cheap pitchers is guys who don't give up a ton of power, which Flexen is not. 7% barrel ball rate, 9-degree launch angle, and also has a good pitch count. If he just lucks into a few strikeouts here, a few more easy ones that might be on the board, you can see him have a nice day again. And we've actually seen him have a nice day recently enough that I don't mind getting there. But 5.5 innings of a guy at 5,500 against a team that stinks, I feel like on DraftKings, that's the kind of play that I just don't mind making, especially if no one's going to really be there.
Yeah, I smile as you were saying it because I kind of knew that was who you were going to go to there.
That's
really
the only guy in that spot. He's flexing on him.
There you go. Yeah. Chris has got to stick together, man. 67 2/3 innings in 12 starts. It's reasonable to expect a decent start. I actually have him projected exactly. I have Sandy Alcantara in the middle of him and Ross Stripling. So they're very close on my board. So I think just from that perspective, in terms of looking for a value play to mix and match around different spots, it makes a lot of sense. And totally in terms of the matchup, we talk about the Rockies against right-handed pitching a lot. They're up to, they've improved to a 70 WRC plus as a team. That means 30% below average, 2.59% home run rate, one of the worst in baseball in the split, a 139 team ISO in the split, just not good. 23.7% strikeout rate is the one thing that's around league average for them. Otherwise, this is just a bad team against right-handed pitching. So yeah, there's a little meat on the bone for Flex, and he doesn't have to do a lot at those prices and no ownership for you to at least create a little differential. And then it's in terms of what bat are you paying for. If you're looking from him to, somebody that's 3,500 more, that pays for a decent bat. And that's similar to like the difference between Eduardo Rodriguez and like Zach Wheeler today, one of the premium pitchers, is more than Vlad Guerrero on the FanDuel slate, who's the most expensive hitter. So you can fit a full Vlad Guerrero between Eduardo Rodriguez and Zach Wheeler, who don't project all that differently. And the spot is probably better for Rodriguez. So it's really interesting slate today.
Yeah, and there are other options that we could talk about, which I'm just going to say Freddie Peralta. I think I didn't quite put him with the stud category, but he's going to be under 10% owned at that same price tag. And facing an Arizona team that does strike out above league average on the year, 24.6% against right-hand pitching. And Clayton Kershaw, who the stuff I mentioned the last time that he was pitching on a show I was doing, but a 29.3% K rate, 1.01 whip. He's been very solid, even though he did underperform when I saw him in person. And I will downgrade him mentally for that. But 16% swing strike rate, solid numbers, and under 15% ownership. Those are guys too that I just feel like I just want to mention that if you are chopping your Cole ownership and you don't like, Giolito quite as much, or you just want to spread the ownership around, I think just getting a little bit more Kershaw, a little bit more of Peralta are just perfectly fine moves to make on the slate. But Terry, before we do money time, anybody else you want to just point an arrow to real fast, a pitcher, or just give your case, I guess, really quickly here before we move on to the hitting?
Yeah, I'm with you on both of those guys. They're up toward the top of my board. Another guy who's popping to the top in my projections here, not totally comfortable with it. I'll see where I end up with it, is actually on the other side of that game. Zach Allen for 8,000 on FanDuel. I'm getting a reasonable projection for him. 29 1/3 innings over 6 starts so far, 27.1% strikeout rate. The walks are up at 11.6%, 1.26 whip, 4.37. Not a lot to justify it just in the quick stat line there, but he does project well for me. Nobody's going to be there. So I'm going to at least poke at it as I do my sorting process while we talk through hitters. For me, I get like Stroman and DeSclafani from the mid-range. I would be fine with shares of them. Would probably cut it off around there in terms of the FanDuel slate. Most of those guys, that's around where the 30-point projections cut off, with trending up to the 40-point range for the top end of the slate. So I kind of like that grouping. Tariq Skubal falls into that for me, but I get monster power numbers coming back for him, and I actually like the St. Louis stack better. So I'm going to temper expectations for that, but I would maybe both sides that one, particularly where he's only 6,600 on DK. I think that's just a myth price on him despite the power metrics I get coming back.
Just with Gallen real fast, because he is historically a guy that I like, but is there any pitch count issue with him? Because he had the UCL strain or whatever, and I don't know. I don't have his pitch counts in front of me from the last time, but he pitched the 17th and
that's
2.2
specifically
innings.
The thing I wanted to look into while we were looking at it. So yeah, so
I
didn't get a chance to check it out. Yeah.
Let's do the ownership. We'll get an answer on Zach Gallen after that, but let me flip the hat. It's money time here, guys, which if you are new to the channel. It's the most profitable time in DFS because we're giving you guys a free look at the Awesemo ownership projections, and you can always get those ownership projections for yourself. In fact, if you use the promo code MLB live before lock right now at awesemo.com/join, get yourself 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus. So take advantage of that here. And ownership projections in baseball, they're crucial in every sport. Like I'm not gonna lie about that, but in baseball, they are also really important just to figure out where the field is, because you can directly pivot from it and find leverage and all that stuff. So check it out at awesemo.com/join and use that promo code MLB live before lock for 25% off. But the top projected owned plays on DraftKings today, number 1 will be Garrett Cole, 38% now. Number 2, Lucas Giolito coming up a little bit here to 31%. Max Scherzer at number 3 on DraftKings, 28%. Number 4, Yordan Alvarez, 22%, part of that likely highly owned Houston stack. And number 5, Zach Wheeler coming up to 20%. And just based off these numbers, I feel like maybe a little more utility in going to Freddie Peralta now that Giolito's come up even more and Scherzer's also come up a little bit more. But Terry, any thoughts if you're that top 5, Cole, Giolito, Scherzer, Alvarez, Zach Wheeler on DraftKings? Because these guys are being owned pretty close to flat, I guess, besides Garrett Cole.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the expectation that we had. So it's really just a matter of whether you want to ride the field with Cole and get that heavy on somebody. I think it's just a clear undercut spot where you can spread around. We've got so many pitchers and so many viable pitching spots on this slate that we've talked about. There's just a ton of things on the board. So I just don't think I want to get to that heavy kind of weight on any of these pitchers. I'd rather get to decent shares of a wide swath of guys, some of whom are going to come up pretty underowned. And I think Freddie Peralta falls firmly into that bucket. 35.9% strikeout rate on the season, over 75 innings and 13 starts. He's been excellent. 14.8% strikeout, swinging strike rate, 3.39 xFIP, 0.87 whip. Plenty to love about Freddie Peralta in this matchup. So yeah, give me some shares of that, and I'll strip away some shares from Garrett Cole and spread those around. I still want to have a decent weight in that top end, the 4 guys that we talked about as being the premium options. And then just to round off the Gallen thing, yeah, it looks like he went 2 2/3, faced 14 hitters his last time out. That was his first time back since mid-May after the injury. I don't see a specific pitch count, but yeah, I would definitely shave off any kind of expectation of upside there. So we can take that one back off the board.
Okay. Yeah. So good to know there. And yeah, and I'm with you on overall the approach here. You know, worth pointing out, Peralta now down under 5% expected ownership on DraftKings. Clayton Kershaw still under 15%. So there your price point pivots. You could save a little money and get there on DraftKings. On FanDuel, top 5, number 1 is going to be Yordan Alvarez on here too, 29%. Number 2, Garrett Cole, 26.2%. Number 3, Jose Altuve, 23% on FanDuel. Number 4, Robel Garcia at 23%. And number 5, Javi Baez at 22.4%. Terry, anybody in that group here stand out? Alvarez, Cole, Altuve, Robel Garcia, and Javi Baez.
One of these things is not like the others. Yeah, that's a little bit aggressive there, but hey, I guess it makes sense. He's hitting second in that lineup, so it makes sense he's drawing all that ownership. Dead minimum 2,000 on FanDuel, 3,200 over on DK, so that's where it's coming from. But we're talking about a guy who's striking out 37.2% of the time over his 43 plate appearances this season. A 200, 233, 300 slash with a dead 100 ISO, creating runs 51% worse than average in the unfairly small sample size. That's just aggressive. I don't really care about the value that much, but I think a lot of it is just coming in the top end of Astros stacks there, going up against Jorge Lopez. I think there's plenty of reason to talk about getting to the Astros. I don't know that I want to put that much weight in offsetting my cost and offsetting my ownership with him, though, particularly when there's some other interesting guys a little further down in the lineup that maybe you could spread it around, like Yuli Gurriel. I'd rather find 1,200 extra and pay for 10% on Yuli Gurriel than put that much weight at 2,000 into Robel Garcia. It just makes sense. So I think there are ways to roster it without him.
So we should talk more about the Astros, but I had a thing I wanted to get to up top here, and I was going to say a bit, and honestly, it is a bit. So, Terry, there's a debut of one player on the slate, a man who has the potential to change the entire landscape with his appearance in Major League Baseball, and I want you to tell me, Terry, where are you landing today with one Lars Nootbaar and his debut for the St. Louis Cardinals? Because, so here's why I'm asking this, because anybody who knows, if you've watched some of the strategy shows or the deeper dives in Live Before Locks recently, I love MLB The Show. I play a lot of MLB The Show. And I was playing the Road to the Show mode with my guy. And on one of the opposing teams, because I'm on the Reds, in the minors, was Lars Nootbaar was on the other side. And I was like, are they just making up fake names? Like, is that what the game is doing? This is a very silly name. And no, he is a real human being who is playing today, despite being a lefty going against lefty Tariq Skubal. I just needed to point him out because that name is sounds delicious. First of all, it'd be the main thing I'd say.
Yeah, that made me. It was the first time I had seen it when the confirmed lineup came out. I mentioned in Slack chat that it might have to be my new favorite player. I think it's interesting that we've got Nootbaar against Screwball. I think there's plenty of interesting things about it. I think it's funny that the simulation's trying to sneak guys like Lars Nootbaar and Sky Bolt past us in the 9-hole to create a player type name. So yeah, I'm with you on that one. Very interesting name, but not expecting a ton from him necessarily in terms of where he would project. He's also not on either slate as far as I can tell, so don't really have to worry about him here, but hopefully he turns the lineup over because I'm going to be aggressive on some card shares, I think, here.
Yeah, so we can talk about that and going to jump back to the Astros and also talk Wander Franco because I think that's a relevant play to talk about here. Who is the real rookie that's going to matter, though? Obviously, Lars, if you hear this show, I hope you know that I do enjoy your name very much. And I hope you have a candy line at some point in your life. But the Cardinals here, I like the Cardinals a good amount. And I wish the weather were a little bit hotter and played a little more humidity because I think they would destroy Skubal today. But I think still they have a pretty good shot of getting him. This team doesn't strike out a lot. And Skubal's been a shockingly good strikeout guy on the year, 28% K rate, a little bit less than that, 27.8%. I'm rounding up, but the swinging strike rate's been solid, 12%, but he's not getting guys to chase a lot, of 29% chase rate. And against a really disciplined Cardinals lineup, he gets on base at a 320 clip on the year against left-hand pitching. And all these guys splits for the most part are going to be substantially better against left-hand pitching. I think this is the spot where Skubal really gets to see that xFIP on the rise. And you see his xFIP too against right-hand bats, 6.1 xFIP for him since last year, 282 ISO allowed. And he also gives up a good amount of steals to righties. There is danger here for him across the board. And I think this card stack, even with the weather not being great, I like him a lot. And if anybody watched these shows too, you know, just like MLB The Show, I don't like the Cards very often, but boy, against Skubal, I think they can really take advantage.
Yeah, this is a team I've actually looked to a few times. One of my more go-to type organizations in baseball, just in general, when they've got this many good hitters in the lineup. I like the two switch hitters up at the top. Tommy Edman brings a lot of speed to the table. They both bring a little bit of mid-range power and some on-base skill leading into the power hitters in this lineup. Absolutely love Tyler O'Neill on this slate. I think at price, and that's the focus really on FanDuel is the pricing. You're talking about Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado leading at 3,300 and 3,100 respectively. Everybody else in this lineup well below 3,000. Tyler O'Neill 29. Carlson 24, Edmund 27. There's just so many easy ways to put this team together. They're drawing some ownership, but it's not egregiously bad. And I'm getting decent power marks coming back the other way, all the way up and down the lineup. Honestly, I wrote about him in my article today, but just to zero in on what I was focusing on, the 4.46 xFIP, the 1.45 whip for Skubal, and then looking at the StatCast board, 15th percentile in hard hit rate allowed, 16th in average exit velo, 15th in expected slugging percentage against, 3rd percentile barrel rate allowed. We've got some barrel rate specialists in this lineup. We've got some guys with extreme home run upside like Tyler O'Neill. So really, really like the spot for the Cards. I'll be overweight on them. I think there's interesting ways to put them together when you get down to Yachty, when you get down to Edmundo Sosa, Paul DeJong. Even if Lars Nootbaar was on the slate, I'd probably have shares of him too. I just really like this team. I'll have a lot of cards in this spot.
Yeah, it's Skubal with the, again, the very high barreled ball rate, also giving up a really optimal launch angle. There's a lot of ways it can go badly. And again, Skubal, one of those guys who has had some fantasy success recently because he is getting strikeouts, but he's one of those guys for me to watch as the temperatures do heat up across the country where he's just going to have some real tough days. And he's going to have days where I think he's going to get those strikeouts too. So that kind of makes him an ideal GPP guy to go to in some of these spots. Let's talk. I think
I would do that, by the way. But like I said before, I am probably going to both sides this a little bit because I do get a good projection from him based on some of the strikeouts. And there are strikeouts available in this lineup as well with guys like Tyler O'Neill. So it's a little bit of a both side spot, but I'm more firmly on the bats.
So let's talk Wander Franco real fast because I do think the fact that he's basically minimum salary, I mean, he is minimum salary on DraftKings, and I think he's around the same mark on FanDuel. You can correct me on that. As a one-off play, like he's going to be 16% owned, normally not the move, but he has really been a monster in the minors. And this year in particular, up to a 261 ISO overall, 315 batting average, getting on base at a 370 clip. He's going against Eduardo Rodriguez, who we like as a pitcher, but I do think there is room to sort of hedge a little bit against him and take some, I think being with the field and Wander Franco would be be really where I wouldn't mind going. The Rays overall, I don't think the most appealing stack, but I do think, Franco can get on base. Maybe he does make it easier for guys like a Rosarena, who certainly had a lot of power against lefties. And, the park factor is not great here, Terry. So I don't want to advocate for the full stack, but I feel like for anybody out there who wants to do I want to play the rookie, the hot rookie who's a novelty play like people did with Vlad Guerrero when he first came into the league. I actually don't mind to play today because he's so cheap and he actually is legitimately good. And I would find it hard to believe he's going to kill you on the slate, even though like the stack itself, probably not the strongest.
Yeah, I don't love the stack based on some of the overall numbers that we talked about in terms of how this lineup performs against lefties. But if you're looking for a one-off shortstop, I actually prefer it on Fanduel, where he's a little bit more expensive. He's 2,500 over there, which is pushing the ownership down below 5%. At 2,000, I love the price tag and the upside for the kid, but he's drawing around 15% ownership on DK. I don't love that if I'm looking for a one-off for a kid in his first big league game. Yeah, he's had professional at bats. The vast majority of his plate experiences so far in the minors came at A ball, high A or lower. Season in rookie ball. He's only 20. He's an accelerated prospect. He is a premium hitter for sure. This kid is going to be a star. Just looking at traditional scouting metrics, an 80 grade hit tool potential, 60 grade game power. He's got it all. Switch hitter as well. So he's done it, and he steals bases. In rookie ball in 2018, 11 homers, 4 steals. In 2019, combined for 9 homers and 18 steals across 2 levels of low A and high A. And then, like you said, in this season in AAA, 7 home runs, 5 stolen bases, and a nice triple slash, 315, 367, 586, creating runs 48% better than average with a 272 ISO, only striking out 12% of the time. Lots of like there. It's just, I don't know if I want to eat that weight even at the minimum as a one-off, and I don't want the stacks. So take it or leave it, I guess, is at that point.
Okay. Yeah. And I again think that's a perfectly logical way to look at it. A chalk one-off, usually not the approach people are trying to go to, but I do feel like I know people out there and I know people love to save money on positions and then also play the guy who you hear about, or I've heard about a lot over a certain course of time. So I would say for me, I really don't have an issue playing him because I think he's going to be good. And I think he's in a spot to actually do some stuff against Eduardo Rodriguez and probably in general in the league, though. If he ends up being like Jared Kelenic, then we could just throw this out the window and pretend this conversation never happened. Let's talk about the Astros because they are the chalk stack again. And we had a debate on Live Before Lock yesterday, wondering if the ownership would hold up with the weather, posing a little bit of risk, the game playing in a delay and all that yesterday. And the ownership did hold up for some of the guys, came down a little bit more for a couple of them, but like Jose Altuve kept 30%. Today, you're going to see all these guys on DraftKings over 20%, some of them hovering around 30% again, including Robel Garcia, who will be a chalk play on both sites today. How are you approaching the Astros? Because I think today they're going to be overvalued. I think Jorge Lopez is one of those guys that I mentioned a couple of weeks back when he had ended up having a really good day against Minnesota, but part of the cause for concern with me against Minnesota was the low launch angle. He does get ground balls at a pretty high rate, 6.5 degree launch angle, gets barreled pretty hard. So I think there's certainly potential for Houston to have a good hitting day. I just don't think they're going to have the kind of power day that justifies this much ownership on a 5-man stack. So to me, Terry, I think Houston being under the field today is the move to make. Top Stacks tool does seem to back that out. One of the most over-leveraged teams on the slate today. So how are you handling Houston going, into a nice spot overall against Jorge Lopez?
Yeah, very much the same. For me, they're coming up in my crunch a little bit just because I leave things more open in my crunch and then take care of some of the ownership, the leverage in my sorting process on the back end. So in the full pool of lineups, 4-man stacks are coming up like 11% of the time. It's putting them in, the 5-6 range behind some of the teams I prefer that we talk about or will talk about. So they're on the board for me, but I think when it comes out in the wash based on leverage, just with so much of the field being on them, I'm going to have less than that. So it'll probably be under the field for me as well. I love the hitters. I love the spot. There is some upside downside in terms of the matchup for what you said about Jorge Lopez, but he's also a guy who's struggling on the StatCast board. 29th percentile hard hit, 19th percentile barrel rate, 20th percentile expected slugging percentage against a team loaded with premium bats like the Astros. There's plenty of upside for the Astros here, but I agree. You're walking such a fine line with that much ownership. They really need to explode, and you're still going to be with a large chunk of the field, a third of the field at the best. So it's not a great spot in my book, just in terms of how much of the field is going to be on them. Could they have the highest score of the night? Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the risk profile you take on, but when you have a slate of this size, I think you can get away from them, and that to me is how I'm feeling. And then we also had who is this in the chat saying David Fangs, like I know they talked about St. Louis, but who would you really stack? Here's one thing you could find for yourself today on the top stacks tool is just sort it for yourself because it's free today. So I'm going to drop the link in the chat in case anybody missed that, but you can see it for DraftKings or Fanduel. And again, check out the most under leveraged stacks or over-owned stacks according to the top stacks tool. It's a big part of the process that does shorten it down, especially if you're somebody who doesn't have a lot of prep time. That's one way to do it. And I'll just sort by leverage here too, because it's free. And there's a team that I do like today as well that immediately surfaces on the top stacks tool. The San Francisco Giants, I think, are a solid team to get to today. The spot for them going against Andrew Heaney, certainly a volatile pitcher, good strikeout rate on him with a 29% clip on the year. But he's going against an Angels or going against a Giants team for the Angels with a 181 ISO on the year, gets left-hand pitching, 330 on base percentage, and Heaney walking at an 8% rate, always has given up a high ISO to right-handed bats. I feel like this spot for the Giants, Terry, to me, nobody really going to be here. Looks like the only ownership going to Austin Slater on DraftKings, who's going to be a cheap leadoff bat who does have pop. But to me, a full stack you can get here, and you can pay up to be contrarian for guys like Posey and Yastrzemski as well. There's a lot of logic to me in going to San Francisco today. But how are you feeling about the Giants? And I guess, are you finding them as over leverage or rather under owned on FanDuel today?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting spot. I touched on them. They were one of the stacks that I wrote about, not the featured stack, which was the Cards, and I will be rostering the Cardinals for whoever asked who were really stacking. But yeah, I love this spot. San Francisco's crushed lefties this year, leading 4.91% home runs rate in the split, 181 team ISO, creating runs 8% better than average. They've been reliably good at not striking out against lefties for years now, and they're at 22.9% this season, which is around the middle of the league, actually a little bit worse than they've been historically, but there's plenty of safety in terms of the lack of strikeouts. That's not a huge rate, so I'm comfortable with that. I think they're very affordable too. There's a lot of upside in the pricing, which is very low. You're talking about getting Darren Ruff here as a righty with some decent power going up against the lefty for the dead minimum, hitting third in this lineup. He brings a little bit of additional speed with his power. Mike Yastrzemski, lefty, don't mind. Buster Posey, I love as a righty bat. Wilmer, we all know about in splits. Righty-lefty is a great spot there. And Brandon Belt, lefty, I don't mind. So a lot of power here. We can definitely roster this lineup basically top to bottom. I like it a lot.
Yeah, and I think it's a team that's going to be a little underrepresented. And actually, the same is kind of true to me for the Angels on the other side. This park overall, I think people sometimes sleep on Angel Stadium being as good of a power hub as it's been, but it's been substantially above league average in terms of home run rate for the last few years since they adjusted dimensions there. And actually 70% humidity today in Anaheim is a pretty good mark for Southern California. So I think the ball could fly pretty well going against DeSclafani. And actually a question I would have for you, Terry, Shohei Ohtani does fit the criteria we talk about here where they're going to be very chalky today, maybe not a guy you take as a one-off, but I do think if you go to this full stack and the team looks better, if you're going to have Rendon in the mix, Jared Walsh as well, it's in the projected lineup, so we don't have to confirm one yet, but a lot of lefties going against DeSclafani, I think could make it tough, and Shohei Ohtani certainly as good of a lefty as you'll find out there. DeSclafani giving up a 207 ISO since 2019, 5.3 xFIP. I feel like the trickle down of Show being good today could lead to these guys having results. So how are you feeling about the Angels, and do you find them worth any exposure for yourself?
So they're not coming up a tremendous amount for me on projection. There are hitters that I like in here, and I think you can build a stack with the top 5 hitters here without too much difficulty. That said, you're drawing a lot of ownership around Ohtani, who's the one individual hitter that I really want to get to. Rendon's struggling this year. I really like him as a hitter. I haven't come anywhere near giving up on Anthony Rendon. So he's a little bit underowned. I think if I'm grabbing a one-off, I'd rather grab a underowned Anthony Rendon hitting 5th in that lineup. As a third baseman with like no popularity and underpriced than a 25% owned Shohei Ohtani, despite the power upside. I do get a great home run mark on Ohtani. He could easily go deep here. But then if you're talking about in terms of stacking the guys behind him, like, all right, yeah, he's most likely going to, if he's going to hit a home run, which is what you're really shooting for by rostering Ohtani, well, he's going to clear the bases of guys like Iglesias, Renfigo, Fletcher, or Upton, who are on in front of him, and do very little for the core guys of that stack behind him, like Taylor Ward, Jared Walsh, or Anthony Rendon. Or he's going to underperform what you need him to do by only being on for a couple base hits. And at 25% ownership, that's not going to be the upside score that you would need from Shohei Ohtani at this price. So it's an interesting little configuration of the stack, just with somebody that popular, that highly owned, with that much individual upside at that price, hitting second. It just has a unique effect on the Ward, Walsh, Rendon portion of that 5-man stack.
Yeah, and Walsh to me jumps out for getting the same lefty matchup as well and having comparable pop. So I think another guy, like I agree, Rendon being a one-off, I certainly don't mind instead of Ohtani, but Jared Walsh too, like 5K is not the best price tag to pay for him, but the results have been there for a long enough period of time that I really wouldn't have a ton of issue getting there. Let's talk about the Cubs. I know we had a question earlier. Somebody was asking, and we covered a lot of the basics on yesterday's shows because people we know we're playing a little more MLB DFS, no NBA games going on, but somebody's asking if 4 Cubs is too many. That would in fact be the perfect amount if you're on Fanduel, and maybe not enough on DraftKings, though I guess it was a 4-4 that won on DraftKings yesterday. Generally, you are trying to get to 5-man stacks for your main stacks on DraftKings. On FanDuel, you're trying to get to 4-man stacks for your base stack on there. But the Cubs today, a team that will be owned like a well-owned 5-man stack for the most part on DraftKings. Javi Baez, Wilson Contreras going to be around 25% owned. Then Jake Marisnick, Chris Bryant, Jock Peterson, all going to be in the 15% range. Going against Elijah Morgan / Eli Morgan, depending upon what site you're looking at for the naming. But a guy who's been a little bit more than an opener and has been very bad in his limited sample size so far in the majors. Faced 35 batters, gave up a 5.8 xFIP, 406 batting average, 8.6% on run rate. Probably numbers that won't hold up over the course of time. But Terry, he's clearly not a good pitcher. A 15.4% barrel ball rate in a small sample size, a 19-degree launch angle, and not missing bats very well either. So you're probably not expecting things to turn around too much. Are you with a very chalky Cubs team today, given what should be a good matchup, but probably a guy who's going to have some better days than he's had so far for sure?
He's going to have to, or he's not going to get the chance to have him.
He'll be with us doing this show.
Right. He might come cheap too. Yeah, that is definitely a targetable spot. The Cubbies were smashing through the top of my home run model today, even taking Rizzo out of the lineup. No Anthony Rizzo in the confirmed lineup. I still love the spot for the Cubbies. You're getting a little bit of weight on them in terms of overall ownership. For some reason, they're not popping up on my board here, but I can still talk it through. So just absolutely there they are. Targetable spot against Eli Morgan. Nobody should be considering him in terms of a value play on either site. Jock Peterson was leading my entire home run index all day long in terms of probability of hitting a home run. I love the spot for him. Even 18% ownership is probably a little bit low just in terms of the overall power upside for 3,300 on Jock. So I can get behind that. And then you're putting the stack together with some of the obvious names like Chris Bryant, Javi Baez, Wilson Contreras. But it looks like the slate is kind of sleeping on Pat Wisdom, who's got 9 home runs and only 77 plate appearances so far this season. That's a little bit noisy, but there's power upside there. Jake Marisnick for 2,100, you're offsetting a little salary. He's owned in the teens. I like Jason Hayward a lot in this spot. Lefty bat, an underrated guy over the course of his career. Yeah, he's sitting at 173, 256, 321 so far this season, creating runs 38% below average, a 148 ISO so far. We know there's slate to slate upside in that, and he's only going off around 4% ownership, so he's an easy way to offset some of the ownership. I really like building Cub stacks as best you can here. If you're putting them together with some of the lower owned quality pitching that we're looking at, you're able to save money to pay up to be contrarian stack to put with them. And I think that's a unique enough way to build that I'm not really sweating the ownership here.
And the Wisdom point is a good one too, because he's been absolutely raking to start the year so far. Only 79 at bats on the last, the year overall, but a 25-degree launch angle. So really just swinging for home runs every time at 94 mile per hour exit velocity, and also a 23.3% barrel ball rate. If Morgan's going to offer anything up and all the ownership's going to the other guys, you could certainly see Baez and Contreras on base. And, I talk about this a lot, but people always go to the chalk and then forget that sometimes these guys could just be on base and then see somebody behind them have the monster day. With Wisdom being sandwiched between all these guys and still at 4K on DraftKings, to me, if he's completing your 5-man stack instead of Jake Marisnick, or at least alternating these guys around, there's a high potential for success here, because Wisdom has just been tearing the cover off the ball. 403 ISO in a limited sample size, nothing to joke about. Yeah, absolutely. And we're talking about a guy, this isn't a prospect anymore. He's 29 years old. He's going to be 30 in mid-August. So this is a post-hype guy who never really had that much hype, but he's had multiple 30-plus home run seasons in the minors. 2019 in AAA, 2017 in AAA, hit 31 home runs in each of those. So this isn't out of nowhere. 260-plus ISO, 273 ISO in Texas in AAA. So lots to like about the power profile with no ownership on him in a targetable spot for power. So yeah, absolutely load up on some Pat Wisdom and Cubby stacks. Let's talk through some of the remaining stacks here. We got about 9 minutes left in the show, and that's also 9 minutes left until lock. So start to think about getting your lineups in, or at least make your final touches on them if you can. And Oakland is one more team that I'd like to get to just talking about through the top stacks tool. 8% chance of being a top stack, along with only 4.6% aggregate ownership, makes them one of the other most under-owned teams on the slate. And they're going against Taylor Hearn, who's given up a good launch angle, given up a 60-degree launch angle, 25% carried for himself. So he's just going to be the opener. So you're going to get to a pretty weak Texas bullpen behind him, who gives up 251 batting average, 1.4 whip. And we saw yesterday, certainly that is a limited sample size thing, but there are days where production can still be there in the closed roof of Texas, even though it's not quite as good as it was in the days of that roof being open all the time. Oakland, I just know it's a team that can drive it in any park, and certainly does it in their own home park, which is one of the worst in the league. And Hearn doesn't seem like he's got anything overpowering here, even though the strikeout rate's been at a 25% clip, only a 9.8% swing strike rate, 25% chase rate, good velocity. But I think a team like Oakland is pretty disciplined. I think they are worth that exposure today, and the field's not going to be there, Terry. So how are you feeling about Oakland bats?
Yeah, this is a premium spot, I think, particularly with the field not there. I think I'd be on it, even if there was more weight on them in terms of the public ownership. Some of the bats drawing a little bit of attention, like Matt Chapman drawing a little bit of attention because there's only 3,000 on the FanDuel slate. But you can work with that when you're getting a Matt Olson behind him at under 10% ownership, Ramon Laureano at under 10% ownership, and the rest of the lineup dropping below that. So there are plenty of ways to do it here. I wouldn't necessarily look to like the Elvis Andrus revenge game. Elvis has improved a little bit in recent weeks, but overall, has left his blue suede track shoes in Texas where they're going. Maybe he gets them back while they're there. Sky Bolt, we mentioned earlier, kind of a creative player guy at the bottom of the lineup. I don't know if we need him, but overall, at least 1 through 7 with Sean Murphy there, Jed Lowry in the 6th spot. I like this Oakland lineup a lot. There are good ways to roster it against Taylor Hearn and cast of miserable thousands coming out of the Texas bullpen there.
All right, so we've talked about a lot of the top teams here on the top stack, so which again is free today. So if you don't want to play along with our version of the game, just go check it out for yourself and sort away and figure out how you want to look at it. But who are you prioritizing as a stack, Terry? Is there somebody that we haven't gotten to that is particularly important to what you're doing on the slate? Because I feel like we've given some of the lower owned ones, some of the slightly over owned ones, and I feel like we've covered, to me, the ones that I find to be the most important, how I'm viewing it.
Yeah, it looks like I'm just running through some of my sort now. It looks like I'll have some Yankees in there. No surprise to the people who are complaining about the guys in Yankees garb being homers. But I think the Yanks profile pretty well. Somebody was saying that in chat before I got on. I actually specifically changed my hat for that person. But I think it's an interesting spot for Yankees. I can always get to Yanks when they're not that highly owned, which they're not on this slate. Everybody in the lineup on FanDuel under 10%. You're getting Luke Voit at a tremendous ownership number because he only cost $2,700 on the DK slate. So I don't know that I'd go there as a cheap owned one-off. I think that's a little bit too much weight for Luke Voit. But on the FanDuel slate, he's not coming near that mark, and all these guys are cheap. So there are good reasons to roster them against Brady Singer here. Only a 23.3% strikeout rate. He could blow through that today, but he puts too many guys on base. 1.43 whip, only inducing 9.9% strikeout, swinging strikes on the year. Ton of power in the Yankees lineup. So they're a little bit obvious. Looks like I'm getting to some Indians in the mix there. I can take or leave them. A little bit of Nats, a little bit of Braves, some Padres, definitely some Astros, some San Francisco.
Are you getting any White Sox? Because somebody was asking about them earlier, and I think maybe I would assume the guess is that they're trying to target Tyler Anderson, who's not that good, but I think closer to like a mediocre pitcher than a terrible one. 11.5% swing strike rate this year, 21% K rate. And the park factors are the main thing. It's in Pittsburgh, which is not normally going to play for great power. And it's only 63 degrees, 54% humidity. So I don't see the White Sox overall, though. I get, Andrew Vaughn's been really good against lefties. Abreu's been good against lefties for enough of a period of time that I wouldn't talk people out of it, Terry. But do you feel any particular love for the White Sox with a not terribly high, but a good implied total?
I'll probably be, in terms of the aggregate ownership for the team, around where the field is. I'm not getting them that heavily, but I'll have some in the mix. I think it's an interesting spot for sure. It's an interesting lineup. So I don't hate that spot. I wouldn't talk anybody off of it.
Yeah, so that's basically how I feel about it too, where I don't think the conditions are in a way that it's going to jump out to me meaningfully. But Anderson has been hit pretty hard against by righties for an extended period of time, though some of that coming in cores. But 222 ISO allowed overall to right-handed bats, I think, is a good enough mark to go against for a White Sox team with certainly enough power righty bats. If you have any final questions, start to get them in now. Let me just make sure the premium Slack is covered in case they are asking anything. Our boy News God did ask earlier for the cash game pitchers on the day, and fortunately made him wait here. But Terry, if you were playing, I assume he's playing on FanDuel, but who would be your cash game pitcher for FanDuel? And I guess we could talk about it for DK too.
Oh, geez. Probably, I think Luke Giolito might be a very good option there. You're not exactly following the ownership, but he projects well and you're saving a little bit of money. So he's interesting for cash. Any of the premium spots, you can always just follow the ownership. Freddie Peralta might be a little interesting if you're looking to save some money there with a relatively safe kind of a floor guy.
Yeah, I feel like for DraftKings, I might be inclined just based on the ownership run. I think Giolito to me would be the one to go to on DK as well. And then Charlie Morton, I think based on the ownership as well and that low price tag, he'd probably be the SP2 for me. And we didn't get to talk about him fully, but hopefully you guys know by this point, Charlie Morton's a solid play. Given, I think he almost had a no-hitter last time out. So you should really know by now that Charlie Morton's been a solid play for a while, but his price tag on DK makes it hard to ignore. So I think a Giolito Morton pairing, probably the best for cash if I had to guess. Let's see. Anything else you're seeing here in your final exposure, Sarah? Or if you're just doing them right now, feel free to just do them too, because I'm just looking at all the
I'm just grabbing them out of my model
right,
here
so
and pasting them across. So give me 30 seconds and I should
Jeremiah Johnson saying a Boston stack wins all the money tonight. Boston, I know, didn't grade out that well to me this morning going against Kittredge and then a bullpen situation behind him. And that's something generally Kittredge, a low launch angle guy. He does induce league average strikeouts and has a 0.83 whip, though. He's going to be out there for one inning, but then they're going to go to a bullpen who has a 1.1 whip. I think out of all the days to go to Boston, it's a park downgrade too. I think there's a lot of factors that add up to me that I wouldn't view Boston that well, but they are, under-owned on the top stack stool, but only a 2.4% chance according to Awesemo. So I think they're probably not a high probability team for good reason, but hey, it's baseball. All the outcomes are out there. They're all going to have the same amount of at-bats, obviously to start off the day. So if you want to take a stab at Boston, go for it, I think would be how I feel.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that one. I don't love the lineup with Danny Santana up top. I haven't really liked what the Red Sox have done all along with their leadoff hitting spot between him and Enrique Hernandez. But yeah, you're running into Ryan Yarbrough probably as the bulk reliever. Then you're getting to some of these bats against righties. But starting off with Kittredge, the whole point of doing that is to take the bat out of the hands of some of these premium hitters the first time through the batting order, which is what he's fairly likely to do here. So you're kind of sacrificing a plate appearance in rostering the Red Sox. That said, you are getting to some of that righty power going up against most likely a lefty for the bulk relief role at essentially no ownership whatsoever. So I don't totally hate it, but I think it is definitely downranked from some of the premium stacks.
I'm saying Yarbrough is a primary pitcher. I didn't know that they were moving Yarbrough back behind an opener after he hadn't been, but I think still I wouldn't.
Earlier in the day.
Oh, is it?
If that changed, apologies, but I did see that earlier.
Okay. So yeah, I don't know. The BVP thing, I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about. To me, the park downgrade is really the biggest part for Boston, as well as the low implied total. But it is a pretty big park downgrade to be hitting in Tampa Bay. So I don't know. Sure. If you, again, no issue going there, just not for me.
Yeah, just with no cost and no ownership, it's always in play with these premium bats on that team. It is a very, very good lineup through the middle. So I can never really object unless they're going up against an apex pitcher, which regardless of who's coming in here, it's not going to be.
Did you get any Toronto for yourself, by the way? I see some people talk about Vladdy Jr. here while we have about 1 minute left to lock. Probably, actually, definitely less by the time you guys hear this. But did you get any of the Blue Jays for yourself going against Alcantara? I feel like he's one of those guys to me that I just almost never target against. And I think he's gotten better as a fantasy pitcher along that. So to me, probably not the Toronto day, especially in Miami with the roof closed. Yeah,
just a little bit, somewhere in the 5% range in terms of the full team stack. Vladdy probably popped a little bit more than that for some one-off shares across some of the 4-3s that I allowed in there, but probably not that much. Looks like I have some, Teoscar, for example, only 4% owned. So if he's only 4%, nobody's really that highly owned.
All right. And that is, we are at lock now. So, hey, make sure to just keep tabs on the top stack stool. If you are playing the late slate, just check it out, see what's going on there to get a read on these teams for today. And then also make sure to go use that promo code MLB live before lock. If you want some Awesemo Plus data at your life, save 25% on your first week at any of the Awesemo Plus packages over at awesemo.com/join. And I think that's it, other than we have the NBA live before lock show coming up in about, 40 minutes or so. It'll be Josh and Laffy coming together. So the strategy show dynamic duo, and they knew to give them an extra 15 minutes too, so that way they can go long fully comfortably as much as they want. People should be following Terry McBride at DigitalB21 and me at Chris Fags as well. Terry, any final plugs for you here before we call it quits and yield the floor to basketball to come?
That extra 15 minutes you're getting of NBA Live before lock tonight is specifically for the person who emailed in yesterday asking why there was no morning strategy show when there were no NBA.
So there. Now you have to pay the price of hearing those guys, but both Josh and Laffy too have to pay the price of doing 15 minutes of more content at 9 p.m. Eastern. What a late start to that one, but go check those guys out. Of course, subscribe to the channel so you see all the content we have going on all day long, and I wish you guys the best of luck tonight. So enjoy your nights and good luck. I'm so hungry.